There isn't one. Or not a good one anyway. That's part of the point. This is physical magic. It's messy, it's crude. As long as you don't knock the building down, it counts. And if you did, it would probably still count.
How did you do it? I mean, when it was your turn.
Froze and shattered it. I do a special kind of cold magic that's my discipline, 63 minutes. And that is a record.
It used to be you could say friend in Elvish, and it would let you in. Now, too many people have read Tolkien.
Elliot, darling, I think our dinner must be ready. Josh, maybe you could do something about Tot? The mosquitoes are getting in. Mick. The mosquitoes are getting in.
Still dazed, Quentin trailed Elliot into the kitchen, which was again larger and nicer than really seemed plausible from the outside, with white cabinets up to the high ceiling and soapstone counters and an aerodynamic-looking 1950s refrigerator. Elliot sloshed some wine from his glass into a pan of red sauce on the stove.
Never cook with the wine you wouldn't drink. Though I guess that presupposes that there is a wine I wouldn't drink.
That thoughtful, he didn't seem at all embarrassed by the fact that he'd ignored Quentin for the past year. It was like it never happened.
Thoughtful? So you have this whole place to yourself? Worried, I didn't want to let on how much I wanted to belong here, even now that I did, officially, belong here.
Pretty much. So do you, now.
Thoughtful, do all the disciplines have their own clubhouses?
It's not a clubhouse. This'll cook in about a minute flat.
Thoughtful. Then what is it?
Well, all right, it is a clubhouse. But don't call it that. We call it the cottage. We have the seminars here, and the library isn't bad. Sometimes Janet paints in the bedroom upstairs. Only we can get in here, you know.
Thoughtful, what about Fog?
Oh, and Fog, though he never bothers. And Bigby. You know Bigby, right?
Quentin shook his head.
I can't believe you don't know Bigby. God, you're going to love Bigby.
He tasted the sauce, then glugged in a slug of heavy cream and stirred it in widening circles. The sauce paled and thickened. Elliot had a jaunty, off-handed confidence at the stove.
All the groups have a place like this. The Naturals have this deeply lame treehouse off in the forest. The Illusionists have a house just like this one, though only they know where it is. You have to find it to get in. Knowledge just has the library, the poor suckers. And healing has the clinic.
Elliot, we're starving.
The worried I wondered how Alice was faring out there.
All right. I hope you don't mind pasta. It's all I made. There's bruschetta out there, or there was. At least there's lots of wine. God, I love cooking. I think if I weren't a magician, I'd be a chef. It's just such a relief after all that invisible, intangible bullshit, don't you think? Thoughtful Richard was the real cook around here. I don't know if you knew him. He graduated last year. Tall, total grind, made us all look bad in front of Bigby, but at least he could cook. Grab those 2 bottles there, would you? And the corkscrew.
With a white tablecloth and 2 heavy silver candelabras and a wildly eclectic assortment of silverware, some of which bordered on light hand-to-hand weaponry, the table in the library almost looked like somewhere you could eat. The food was simple, but not at all bad. He'd forgotten he was starving. Janet performed a trick. Quentin wasn't sure whether it was magical or just mechanical, to shorten the long seminar table into a dinner table. Janet, Josh, and Elliot gossiped about classes and teachers, and who was sleeping with whom, and who wanted to sleep with whom. They speculated endlessly about other students' relative strengths as spellcasters. They maneuvered around one another with the absolute confidence of people who had spent huge amounts of time together, who trusted and loved one another, and who knew how to show one another off to best advantage and how to curb each other's boring and annoying habits. Quentin let the chatter wash over him. Eating a sophisticated meal alone in their own private dining room felt very adult.
This was it. I had been an outsider before, but now I had really entered into the inner life of the school. This was the real Brakebills. I was in the warm, secret heart of the secret world.
They were arguing about what they would do after they graduated.
I imagine I'll retreat to some lonely mountaintop. Become a hermit for a while. I'll grow a long beard and people will come to me for advice, like in cartoons.
Advice about what? About whether a dark suit counts as black tie?
And I'd like to see you try to grow a beard. God, you're self-centered. Don't you want to help people?
People? What people?
Poor people. Hungry people. Sick people. People who can't do magic.
What have people ever done for me? People don't want my help. People called me a faggot and threw me in a dumpster at recess when I was in 5th grade because my pants were pressed.
Well, I hope for your sake there's a wine cellar on your mountaintop. Or a full bar. You won't last 8 hours without a drink.
I will brew a crude but potent beverage from local herbs and berries.
Or dry cleaning.
Thoughtful. Well, that is a problem. You can use magic, but it's never the same. Maybe I'll just live at the plaza like Eloise.
I'm bored. Let's do Hopper's fire shaping.
He went over to a large cabinet full of dozens of tiny drawers, narrow but deep, that turned out to be a kind of miniature twig library. Each drawer bore a tiny handwritten label, starting with Ailanthus in the upper left-hand corner and ending with Zalkova, Japanese, in the lower right. Harper's fire shaping was a useless but extremely entertaining spell for stretching and leading a flame into elaborate calligraphic shapes that flared for a moment in midair and then disappeared. You did it with an aspen twig. The evening devolved into attempts to shape the candle flames into increasingly elaborate or obscene words and shapes, which in turn led, inevitably, to the curtains catching on fire, apparently not for the first time and having to be extinguished. A halt was called. Elliot produced a slender, dangerous-looking bottle of grappa. Only 2 of the candles had survived the fire shaping, but nobody bothered to replace the others. It was late, after 1 in the morning. They sat there in the half-darkness in contented silence. Janet lay on her back on the carpet staring up at the ceiling, her feet propped up on Elliot's lap. There was a funny physical intimacy between the 2 of them, especially considering what Quentin knew about Elliot's sexual appetites.
So this is it? We're full-fledged physical kids now. Don't we have to be hazed or branded or, I don't know, shaved or something?
Not unless you want to be.
Thoughtful. Somehow, I thought there would be more of you. Of us.
Thoughtful. This is it. Since Richard and Isabel graduated, there aren't any 5th years. Nobody placed in. If we didn't get anybody this year, Fogg was talking about merging us with Natural.
Josh shuddered theatrically.
Potful. What were they like? Richard and Isabel.
Like fire and ice. Like chocolate and marzipan.
It's different without them.
Good riddance.
Oh, they weren't so bad. You remember when Richard thought he could bring the weather vane to life? He was going to make it move around by itself. He must have been up there for 3 days, rubbing it with fish oil and... I don't even want to think about what else.
That was unintentionally funny. Doesn't count.
Janet snorted.
I got plenty of Richard.
A tiny hush fell. It was the first false note of the evening.
But now we have a quorum again. An eminently respectable quorum. Physical magic always gets the best ones.
To the best ones.
Quentin raised his glass. He was up in the lofty branches of his fiery tree, swaying in the warm alcoholic breeze.
The best ones.
They all drank.
Thoughtful the entire time I'd been at Brakebills, through first year, the exams, the whole disaster with Penny. Right up until the night I joined the physical kids, I had been holding my breath without knowing it. I realized only now that I'd been waiting for Brakebills to vanish around me like a daydream. Even aside from the many and varied laws of thermodynamics that were violated there on a regular basis, it was just too good to be true. It was like Fillory that way. Fillory never lasted forever. Ember and Umber promptly kicked the Chatwins out at the end of every book. Deep down, I felt like a tourist who, at the end of the day, would be herded back onto some dirty, lumbering, snorting tour bus and shipped home, clutching a tacky souvenir postcard and watching as the towers and hedges and peaks and gables of Brakebills dwindled in the rearview mirror. But it hadn't happened. And now I understood, I really got that it wasn't going to happen. I'd wasted so much time thinking it's all a dream, and it should have been somebody else, and nothing lasts forever. It was time I started acting like who I was. A 19-year-old student at a secret college for real, actual magic.
Now that he was in among them, he had some leisure to observe the physical kids up close. When he first met Elliot, Quentin assumed that everyone at Brakebills would be like him, but In fact, that wasn't the case at all. For one thing, even in this rarefied setting, Elliot's bizarre personal manner set him apart. For another, he was conspicuously brilliant. In class, maybe not quite as quick as Alice, but Alice worked her ass off and Elliot didn't even try, or if he did, he hid it very, very well. As far as Quentin could tell, he never studied at all. The only thing in the world that he would actually cop to caring about was his appearance, especially his expensive shirts, which he wore with cufflinks, even though it cost him regular menial punishments for violating the dress code. Josh always wore the standard school uniform, but managed to make it look like he didn't. His jacket never quite fit, his wide, round build. It was always twisted or rumpled or too narrow in the shoulders. His whole personality was like an elaborate joke that he never stopped telling. It took Quentin a while to figure out that Josh expected people not to take him seriously, and he enjoyed, not always kindly, the moment when they realized too late that they'd underestimated him. Because he wasn't as self-absorbed as Elliot or Janet, he was the group's sharpest observer, and he missed very little of what went on around him. He told Quentin that he'd been waiting for Penny to snap for weeks.
Are you kidding? That guy was a mystery wrapped in an enigma and crudely stapled to a ticking fucking time bomb. He was either going to hit somebody or start a blog. To tell you the truth, I'm kind of glad he hit you.
Unlike the other physical kids, Josh was an undistinguished student, but once he'd mastered a skill, he was an exceptionally forceful spellcaster. It was a full 6 weeks into his first year at Brakebills before he was able to move his marble by magic. But when he finally did, as Elliot told the story, it shot through a classroom window and buried itself 6 inches in the trunk of a maple tree outside where it probably still was. Janet's parents were lawyers of the high-flying Hollywood consorting variety and colossally wealthy. She grew up in L.A., being babysat by various celebrities, whom under duress but not very much duress she would name. Quentin supposed that accounted for the vivid actressy edge to her manner. She was the most visible of the physical kids, loud and brusque and always proposing toasts at dinner. She had terrible taste in men. The best that could be said of her endless series of boyfriends is that none of them lasted long. Pretty rather than beautiful, she had a flat, flapperish figure, but she used what she had to maximum advantage. She sent her uniforms back home to be tailored, and there was something vibrantly sexy about her ravenous too-wide gaze. You wanted to meet it and be devoured by it. Janet was about as annoying as a person could be and still be your friend, but Quentin was never bored around her. She was passionately loyal, and if she was obnoxious, it was only because she was so deeply tender-hearted. It made her easily wounded, and when she was wounded, she lashed out. She tortured everybody around her, but only because she was more tortured than anyone. Even though he was part of the physical kids now, Quentin still spent most of his time with the other third years. He took his classes with them, and worked with them in PA, and studied for exams with them, and sat with them at dinner. The maze had been scrambled and redrawn over the summer. As it was every summer, it turned out, and they spent a week's worth of afternoons relearning it, yelling at one another over the tall hedges when they got lost or found an especially sweet shortcut. They threw a party in honor of the fall equinox. There was a strong undercurrent of Wiccan sentiment at Brakebills, though hardly anybody took it seriously except the naturals. They had a bonfire and music and a wicker man, and a light show by the illusionists, and everybody stayed out way too late, their noses running in the cold fall air, their faces hot and red from the fire. Alice and Quentin taught the others the fire-shaping spell, which was a big hit, and Amanda Orloff revealed that she'd been brewing a batch of mead on the sly for the past couple of months. It was sweet and fizzy and disgusting, and they all drank way too much of it and felt like death the next day. That fall, Quentin's studies changed again. There was less rote learning of gestures and arcane languages, though God knows there was plenty of that, and more actual spellcasting. They spent an entire month on low-level architectural magic, spells to strengthen foundations and rain-proof roofs and keep gutters free of rotting leaves, all of which they practiced on a pathetic little shed barely larger than a doghouse. Just one spell to make a roof resistant to lightning took Quentin 3 days to memorize, grinding the gestures in a mirror to get them exactly right, at the proper speed and with the proper angles and emphasis. And then there was the incantation, which was in a corrupt old Bedouin Arabic and very tricky. And then Professor March conjured a little rainstorm which emitted a single lightning bolt that sheared through it in one eye-searing, ego-demolishing instant while Quentin stood there getting soaked to the skin. On alternate Tuesdays, Quentin worked with Bigby, the physical kid's unofficial faculty advisor, who turned out to be a small man with large liquid eyes and close-cropped gray hair who dressed neatly, if extremely affectedly, in a long Victorian-looking duster. His posture was slightly hunched, but he didn't seem otherwise frail or crippled. Quentin had the impression that Bigby was a political refugee from somewhere. He was always making vague noises about the conspiracy that had ousted him, and what he would do following his inevitable return to power. He had the stiff, wounded dignity of the deposed intelligentsia. One afternoon during a seminar, Bigby specialized in ridiculously difficult enchantments that transmuted elements by manipulating their structure on a quantum level. He paused and performed an odd gesture. He reached back behind first one shoulder, then the other, unbuttoning something back there. The movement reminded Quentin of nothing more than a woman unhooking her bra. When Bigby was finished, 4 magnificent insect wings like a dragonfly's, 2 on each side, sprang out from behind him. He flexed them with a deep, satisfied sigh. The wings were gauzy and iridescent. They disappeared for a second in a buzz of activity, then reappeared as they became still.
Thoughtful, sorry. Couldn't stand it a minute more.
It never stopped, the weirdness of this place. It just went on and on. Professor Bigby, are you a fairy?
Bigby smiled a pained smile. His wings made a dry, chitinous rattle.
Thoughtful, pixie, technically.
He seemed a little sensitive about it. One morning, very early, Professor March was giving a lecture on weather magic and summoning cyclonic wind patterns. For a portly man, he was surprisingly spry. Just looking at him bouncing on his toes, with his red ponytail and his red face, made Quentin want to go back to bed. In the mornings, Chambers served Terry black espresso, which he smelted in a delicate gilded glass exotic Turkish device. But it was all gone by the time Quentin came down for class. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, Professor March was addressing him directly.
Between a subtropical cyclone and an extratropical? Quentin? In the French, please, if you can.
Worried Quentin blinked. He must have drifted off.
There is no difference?
Worried there was a long, awkward pause into which Quentin inserted more words in an attempt to find out what exactly the question had been and to say baroclinic zones as many times as possible just in case they were relevant. People shifted in their chairs. March, having caught the delicious scent of humiliation, was prepared to wait. Quentin waited, too. There was something in the reading about this. He'd actually done it. That was the injustice of it. The moment stretched on and on. His face was on fire. This wasn't even magic. It was meteorology.
Thoughtful, I don't understand.
I'm asking Quentin, Amanda.
Thoughtful. But maybe you could clarify something? For the rest of us, whether these are barotropic cyclones or not, I find it a little confusing.
They are all barotopic, Amanda. It's irrelevant. All tropical cyclones are barotopic.
But I thought one was barotropic and one was baroclinic.
The resulting mass wrangle ended up being so inane and time-consuming that March was forced to abandon Quentin and move on or lose the entire thread of the lecture. If he could have done so unobtrusively, Quentin would have run back to where Amanda Orloff was sitting and kissed her on her broad, unmoisturized forehead. Instead, he settled for blowing her a kiss when March wasn't looking. March had segued into a lengthy spell that involved sketching an elaborate mandala-like symbol on the chalkboard. He stopped every 30 seconds and stepped back to the edge of the stage, hands on hips, whispering to himself, then dove back into the design. The point of the spell was fairly trivial. It either guaranteed hail or prevented it, one or the other. Quentin wasn't really following. And anyway, the principle was the same. Either way, Professor March was struggling with it. The spell was in a very proper and precise medieval Dutch that evidently wasn't his forte.
Thoughtful. It occurred to me that it might be nice if he screwed it up. I hadn't particularly enjoyed being called out on technical minutiae this early in the morning. I would play a tiny prank. Brakebills classrooms were proofed against most forms of mischief, but it was well known that the podium was any teacher's Achilles heel. You couldn't do much to it, but the wards on it weren't quite ironclad, and with a lot of effort and some body English, you could get it to rock back and forth a little. Maybe that would be enough to throw Professor March off his game. I made a few small gestures under my desk between my knees. The podium stirred, as if it were stretching a kink in its back, then became inert again. Success.
March was reeling off some extra old High Dutch. His attention flicked down at the podium as he felt it move. and he hesitated but recovered his concentration and forged ahead. It was either that or start the whole spell over. Quentin was disappointed, but infallible Alice leaned over.
Idiot. He dropped the second syllable. He should have said,
Just then, for an instant, the film of reality slipped off the spokes of its projector. Everything went completely askew and then righted itself again as if nothing had happened. Except that, like a continuity error in a movie, there was now a man standing behind Professor March. He was a small man, conservatively dressed in a neat gray English suit and a maroon club tie that was fixed in place with a silver crescent moon pin. Professor March, who was still talking, didn't seem to realize he was there. The man looked out at the third years archly, conspiratorially, as if they were sharing a joke at the teacher's expense. There was something odd about the man's appearance. Quentin couldn't seem to make out his face. For a second, he couldn't figure out why, and then he realized it was because there was a small leafy branch in front of it that partially obscured his features. The branch came from nowhere. It was attached to nothing. It just hung there in front of the man's face. Then Professor March stopped speaking and froze in place. Alice had stopped, too. The room was silent. A chair creaked. Quentin couldn't move either. There was nothing restraining him, but the line between his brain and his body had been cut. Was the man doing this? Who was he? Alice was still leaned over slightly in his direction, and a flyaway wisp of her hair hung in his field of vision. He couldn't see her eyes. The angle was wrong. Everything and everybody was still. The man on the stage was the only thing in the world still in motion. Quentin's heart started to pound. The man cocked his head and frowned, as if he could hear it. Quentin didn't understand what had happened, but something had gone wrong. Adrenaline poured into his bloodstream, but it had nowhere to go. His brain was boiling in its own juices. The man began strolling around the stage, exploring his new environment. His demeanor was that of a gentleman balloonist who had accidentally touched down in exotic surroundings. Inquisitive, amused. With the branch in front of his face, his intentions were impossible to read. He circled Professor March. There was something strange about the way he moved, something too fluid about his gait. When he walked into the light, Quentin saw that he wasn't quite human, or, if he had been once, he wasn't anymore. Below the cuffs of his white shirt, his hands had 3 or 4 too many fingers. 15 minutes crawled by, then half an hour. Quentin couldn't turn his head, and the man moved in and out of his field of view. He puttered with, "That style, the magicians." Cast by our Tales Studio. Please subscribe to our channel if you enjoy listening. Professor March's equipment? He toured the auditorium. He took out a knife and pared his fingernails. Objects stirred and shifted restlessly in place whenever he walked too near them. He picked up an iron rod from March's demonstration table and bent it like a piece of licorice. Once he cast a spell. He spoke too fast for Quentin to catch the details that made all the dust in the room fly up and whirl crazily in the air before settling down again. It had no other obvious effect. When he cast the spell, the extra fingers on his hands bent sideways and backward.
An hour passed, then another. My fear came and went, and came back in huge sweating rushes, crashing waves. I was sure something very bad was happening. It just wasn't clear yet exactly what. I knew it had something to do with my joke on March. How could I have been so stupid? In a cowardly way, I was glad I couldn't move. It spared me from having to attempt something brave.
The man seemed barely aware that he was in a room full of people. There was something grotesquely comic about him. His silence was like that of a mime. He approached a ship's clock that hung at the back of the stage and slowly put his fist through it. He didn't punch it, he forced his hand into its face, breaking the glass and snapping the hands and crushing the mechanism inside until he was satisfied that it was destroyed. It was as if he thought he would hurt it more that way.
Worried class should have been over ages ago. Somebody on the outside must have noticed by now. Where were they? Where was Fogg? Where the hell was that paramedic nursewoman when you really needed her? I wished I knew what Alice was thinking. I wished I could have turned my head just a few degrees more before I'd been frozen, so I could see her face.
Amanda Orloff's voice broke the silence. She must have gotten loose somehow and was chanting a spell rhythmically and rapidly but calmly. The spell was like nothing Quentin had ever heard. An angry, powerful piece of magic. Full of vicious fricatives, it was offensive magic, battle magic, designed to literally rip an opponent to pieces. Quentin wondered how she'd even learned it. Just knowing a spell like that was way off limits at Brakebills, let alone casting it. But before she could finish, her voice became muffled. It went higher and higher, faster and faster, like a tape speeding up, then faded out before she could finish. The silence returned. Morning turned into afternoon in a fever dream of panic and boredom. Quentin went numb. He heard signs of activity from outside. He could see only one window, and that was out of the very corner of his eye, but something was going on out there, blocking the light. There were sounds of hammering and very faintly 6 or 7 voices chanting in unison. A tremendous silent flash of light burst behind the door to the corridor with such force that the thick wood glowed translucent for an instant. There were rumblings as if somebody were trying to break through the floor from underneath. None of this visibly bothered the man in the gray suit.
Thoughtful. In the window, a single red leaf flapped crazily in the wind on the end of a bare branch, having hung on longer into the fall than any of its fellows. I watched it. The wind flailed the leaf back and forth on the end of its stem. It seemed like the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. All I wanted was to go on looking at it for 1 minute longer. I would give anything for that. Just 1 more minute with my little red leaf.
He must have slipped into a trance or fallen asleep. He didn't remember. He woke up to the sound of the man on stage singing softly and high under his breath. His voice was surprisingly tender.
Bye, baby bunting. Daddy's gone a-hunting, gone to get a rabbit skin to wrap his baby bunting in.
He lapsed into humming, then, with no warning, he vanished. It happened so silently and so suddenly that at first Quentin didn't notice he was gone. In any case, his departure was upstaged by Professor March, who'd been standing on stage the entire time with his mouth open. The instant the man was gone, March crumpled forward bonelessly off the stage and knocked himself cold on the hardwood floor. Quentin tried to stand up. Instead, he slid off his chair down onto the floor between the rows of seats. His arms, legs, and back were hideously cramped. There was no strength in them. Slowly, lying on the floor in a mixture of agony and relief, he stretched out his legs. Delicious bubbles of pain released in his knees, as if he were finally unbending them after a transhemispherical flight and coach. Tears of relief started in his eyes. It was over. The man was finally gone and nothing terrible had happened. Alice was groaning too. A pair of shoes, probably hers, was in his face. The whole room rocked with moans and sobs. Afterward, Quentin would learn that Fogg had mustered the entire staff almost immediately, as soon as the man had made his appearance. The school's defensive spells detected him instantly, even if they didn't keep him out. By all accounts, Fogg made a surprisingly competent battlefield commander. Calm, organized, rapid and accurate in his assessment of the situation, skillful in his deployment of the resources at his disposal. Over the course of the morning, an entire temporary scaffold had been constructed around the outside of the tower. Professor Heckler, wearing a welder's helmet to shield his eyes, had nearly set the tower on fire with pyrotechnical attacks. Professor Sunderland had heroically attempted to phase herself through the wall, but to no avail, and anyway, it wasn't clear what she would have done if she succeeded. Even Bigby made an appearance, deploying some exotic non-human witchcraft that Quentin got the impression had made the rest of the faculty a little uncomfortable. That evening after dinner, after the usual announcements about clubs and events and activities had been sullenly and desultorily attended to, Dean Fogg addressed the student body to try to explain what had happened. He stood at the head of the long dining room table looking older than usual, as the candles guttered down and the first years gloomily cleared the last of the silverware. He fussed with his cuffs and touched his temples where he was losing his thin blonde hair.
It will not come as a surprise to many of you that there are other worlds besides our own. This is not conjecture, it is fact. I have never been to these worlds, and you will never go there. The art of passing between worlds is an area of magic about which very little is known. But we do know that some of these worlds are inhabited. Probably the beast we met today was physically quite vast. What we saw would have been a small part of it, an extremity it chose to push into our sphere of being, like a toddler groping around in a tide pool. Such phenomena have been observed before. They are known in the literature as excrescences.
The beast was what Fogg called the thing in the gray suit, and afterward nobody ever referred to it any other way.
And thoughtful, its motivations are difficult to guess. To such beings, we look like swimmers paddling timidly across the surface of their world, silhouetted against the light from above, sometimes diving a little below the surface, but never going very deep. Ordinarily, they pay no attention to us. Unfortunately, something about Professor March's incantation today caught the beast's attention. I understand it may have been corrupted or interrupted in some way. That error offered the beast an opportunity to enter our world.
At this, I convulsed inwardly but kept my face composed. It had been me. I had done it.
Fogg went on.
The beast spiraled up out of the depths like a deep-water shark, intent on seizing a swimmer from below. Its motivations are impossible to imagine, but it did appear as if it was looking for something or someone. I do not know whether it found what it was looking for. We may never know.
Worried ordinarily, Fogg projected an air of certainty and confidence, tempered by his natural slight ridiculousness, but that night he looked disoriented. He lost his train of thought. He fingered his tie.
The incident is finished now. The students who witnessed the incident will all be examined medically and magically and then cleansed in case the beast has marked or tagged or tainted them. Tomorrow's classes are cancelled.
He stopped there and left the room abruptly. Everybody had thought he would say more.
Relieved, but all that came much later. Lying on the floor after the attack, the agony fading from my arms and legs and back, I felt only good things. I felt relieved to be alive. Disaster had been averted. I had made a terrible mistake, but everything was all right now. I felt a profound gratitude for the old, splintery wooden underside of the chair I was looking up at. It was fascinating and beautiful. I could have looked at it forever. It was even a little thrilling to have been through something like that and lived to tell about it. In a way, I was a hero. I breathed deeply and felt the good, solid floor under my back. The first thing I wanted to do, I realized, was to put my hand reassuringly on Alice's warm, soft ankle, which was next to my head. I was so grateful to be able to finally look at her again.
He didn't know yet that Amanda Orloff was dead. The beast had eaten her alive. Love, Lottie? The rest of Quentin's third year at Brakebills went by beneath a gray watercolor wash of quasi-military vigilance. In the weeks that followed the attack, the school was locked down both physically and magically. Faculty members wandered the grounds, retracing the lines of its ancient defensive spells, renewing and strengthening them, and casting new ones. Professor Sunderland spent an entire day walking backward all the way around the school's perimeter, scattering colored powders on the snow behind her in carefully braided trails, her plump cheeks turning pink with cold. She was followed by Professor van der Wegge, who checked her work, and preceded by a gaggle of attentive students who cleared brush and fallen logs out of her path and resupplied her with materiel. It had to be done in one unbroken circuit. Cleansing the auditorium was just a matter of ringing a few bells and burning sage in the corners, but resetting the school's main wards took a solid week. According to student rumor, they were all cinched to an enormous worked iron totem kept in a secret room at the campus's exact geographical center, wherever that was, but nobody had ever seen it. Professor March, who after his ordeal never quite lost a certain anxious, hunted look, roamed endlessly in and out of the school's many basements and sub-basements and cellars and catacombs, where he obsessively tended and reinforced the foundation spells that secured them against attack from below. The third years had made a bonfire at their equinox party, but now the faculty made a real bonfire fed with specially prepared cedar logs, dried and peeled and as straight as railroad ties, stacked in an arcane, eye-bending configuration like a giant Chinese puzzle that took Professor Heckler all day to get right. When he finally lit it, using a twist of paper with words scribbled on it in Russian, it burned like magnesium. They were discouraged from looking directly at it. In a way, it was an education in itself, a chance to watch real magic being worked, with real things at stake. But there was no fun in it. There was only silence at dinner and useless anger, and a new kind of dread. One morning they found the room of a first-year boy cleared out. He'd dropped out and gone home overnight. It was not uncommon to come across conclaves of 3 or 4 girls who mere weeks earlier had actively avoided sitting next to Amanda Orloff at dinner, perched together on the stony rim of a fountain in the maze, weeping and shivering. There were 2 more fights. As soon as he was satisfied that the foundations were taken care of, Professor March went on sabbatical, and those who claimed to know, i.e., Elliot, put the odds of his ever coming back at approximately 0.
Sometimes I wished I could run away, too. I thought I would be shunned for the little joke I'd played on March with the podium. But the strange thing was that nobody said anything about it. I almost wished they would. I didn't know whether I'd committed the perfect crime or a crime so public and unspeakable that nobody could bring themselves to confront me about it in broad daylight. I was trapped. I couldn't grieve properly for Amanda because I felt like I'd killed her. And I couldn't atone for killing her because I couldn't confess, not even to Alice. I didn't know how. So instead, I kept my little particle of shame and filth inside, where it could fester and turn septic. This was the kind of disaster I thought I'd left behind the day I walked into that garden in Brooklyn. Things like this didn't happen in Fillory. There was conflict and even violence, but it was always heroic and ennobling, and anybody really good and important who bought it along the way came back to life at the end of the book. Now there was a rip in the corner of my perfect world, and fear and sadness were pouring in like freezing, filthy water through a busted dam. Brakebills felt less like a secret garden and more like a fortified encampment. I wasn't in a safe little story where wrongs were automatically righted. I was still in the real world, where bad, bitter things happened for no reason, and people paid for things that weren't their fault.
A week after the incident, Amanda Orloff's parents came to collect her things. No special fuss was made over them at their request, but Quentin happened by one afternoon while they were saying goodbye to the dean. All of Amanda's belongings fit into one trunk and one pathetically small paisley fabric suitcase.
My heart seized up as I watched them. I was sure they could see my guilt. I felt like I was covered in it, sticky with it. But they ignored me. Mr. Compresi of Guest. And Mrs. Orloff looked more like siblings than husband and wife, both 6 feet tall and broad-shouldered, with dishwater hair his high and tight, hers in a business-like shag. They seemed to be walking in a daze. Dean Fogg was guiding them by the elbows around something I couldn't see, and it took me a minute to figure out that they were heavily enchanted, so that even now they wouldn't understand the nature of the school that their daughter had attended.
That August, the physical kids straggled back from summer vacation early. They spent the week before classes camping out in the cottage, playing pool and not studying and making a project out of drinking their way jigger by jigger through an old and viscous and thoroughly disgusting decanter of port Elliot had found at the back of a cabinet in the kitchen. But the mood was sober and subdued. Incredibly, Quentin was now a 4th year at Brakebills.
We have to have a Welters team.
No, we don't.
He lay with one arm over his face on an old leather couch. They were in the library in the cottage, exhausted from having done nothing all day.
Yes, actually we do, Elliot. Bigby told me. There's a tournament everybody has to play. They just haven't announced it yet.
Shit.
Shit. I call equipment manager.
Shit. Why? Why are they doing this to us? Why? Kyle?
Shit.
It's for morale. Fogg says our spirits need elevating after last year. Organized Welters is part of a return to normalcy.
My morale was fine until a minute ago. Fuck. I can't stand that game. It's a perversion of good magic. A perversion, I say.
Too bad it's compulsory. And it's by discipline, so we're a team. Even Quentin, who still doesn't have one.
Thanks for that.
I vote Janet captain.
Of course I'm captain, and as captain it is my happy duty to inform you that your first practice is in 15 minutes.
Everybody groaned and stirred and then settled themselves more comfortably where they were.
Janet, stop doing this.
I've never even played. I don't know the rules.
She lay on the rug, paging limply through an old atlas. It was full of ancient maps in which the seas were populated with lovingly engraved marginal monsters, though in these maps the proportions were inverted, and the monsters were far larger and more numerous than the continents. Alice had acquired a pair of uncharacteristically hip rectangular glasses over the summer.
Oh, you'll pick it right up. Welters is fun and educational.
Don't worry, nobody really knows the rules.
Except Janet, dear.
Except me. I'll see you all there at 3.
Amused, she flounced happily out of the room. In the end, it came down to the fact that none of them had anything better to do, which Janet had clearly been counting on. They reassembled by the Welters board, looking bedraggled and unpromising in the baking summer heat. It was so bright out you could barely stand to look at the grass. Elliot clutched the sticky decanter of port, the sleeves of his dress shirt rolled up. Just seeing it made Quentin feel dehydrated. Blue summer sky blazed in the water squares. A grasshopper collided with Quentin's pants and clung there.
So, who knows how we start?
Starting, it involved picking a square and throwing a stone called the globe onto it. The stone was rough marble, bluish in color. It did look a little like a globe and about the size of a ping-pong ball, though it was weirdly heavy. Quentin turned out to be unexpectedly talented at this feat, which was performed at various times during the game. The real trick was to avoid plunking it into a water square, in which case the game was forfeit. Plus, it was a pain to fish the globe out of the water. Alice and Elliot were on the same team, facing off against Josh and Quentin, with Janet refereeing. Janet wasn't the most assiduous student of the physical kids, that was Alice, or the most naturally gifted Elliot. But she was fairly competitive, and she decided to acquire total command of the technical intricacies of welters, which really was an amazingly complicated game.
Without me, you people would be lost.
And it was true. The game was half strategy, half spell casting. You captured squares with magic or protected them, or recaptured them by superseding an earlier spell. Water squares were the easiest, metal the hardest. They were reserved for summonings and other exotic enchantments. Eventually, a player was supposed to step bodily onto the board, becoming in effect a playing piece in his or her own game, and as such vulnerable to direct personal attacks. As he approached the edge, the meadow around Quentin seemed to shrink, and the board expanded as if it were at the center of a fisheye lens. The trees lost some of their color, becoming dim and silvery. Things went quickly in the early rounds as both sides captured uncontested squares in a free-for-all land grab. As in chess, there were any number of conventional openings that had been worked out and optimized long ago. But once all the free squares were gone, they had to start slugging it out head-to-head. The afternoon wore on with long breaks for Janet's highly technical welter's tutorials. Elliot disappeared for 20 minutes and came back with 6 slender bottles of a very dry Finger Lakes Riesling he'd apparently been saving for just such an emergency, in 2 tin buckets full of melting ice. He hadn't thought to bring any glasses, so they swigged straight from the bottles. Quentin still didn't have much of a capacity for alcohol, and the more wine he drank, the less he could focus on the details of the game, which were getting hellishly complex. Apparently, it was legal to transmute squares from one kind to another, and even make them slide around and switch places on the board somehow. By the time the players themselves had stepped onto the board, everybody was so drunk and confused that Janet had to tell them where to stand, which she did with towering condescension. Not that anybody really cared. The sun drifted down behind the trees, dappling the grass with shadows, and the blue of the sky deepened to a luminous aqua. The air was bathwater warm. Josh fell asleep on the square he was supposed to be defending and sprawled across a whole row. Elliot did his impression of Janet, and Janet pretended to get mad. Alice took off her shoes and dabbled her feet in a temporarily uncontested water square. Their voices drifted up and got lost in the summer leaves. The wine was almost gone, the empty bottles bobbing around in the tin buckets, which were now full of lukewarm water, in which a wasp had drowned.
Everyone was pretending to be bored to tears. Or maybe they actually were, but I wasn't. I was unexpectedly happy, though I instinctively kept it a secret. In fact, I was so full of joy and relief I could barely breathe. Like a receding glacier, the ordeal of the beast had left behind it a changed world, jumbled and scraped and raw. But the earth was finally putting up new green shoots again. Fogg's idiotic welter's plan had actually worked. The gray gloom the beast had cast over the school was retreating. It was all right for them to be teenagers again. At least for a little longer. I felt forgiven. Though I didn't even know by whom. Thoughtful? I imagined how they would all look from above. If somebody were to gaze down on them from a low-flying airplane or a wandering dirigible. 5 people strewn around the neat little welter's board on the grounds of their secret, exclusive magical enclave, their voices soft and unintelligible from a distance. How contented and complete in themselves that observer would believe them all to be. And it was actually true. The observer would be right. It was all real.
Without me, you people would be lost.
Worried if welters restored some of Quentin's lost equilibrium, it presented a whole new kind of problem for Josh. They kept on practicing through the first month of the semester, and Quentin gradually got the hang of the game. It wasn't really about knowing the spells, or the strategy, though you did have to know them. It was more about getting spells off perfectly when you had to. It was about that sense of power that lived somewhere in your chest that made a spell strong and vital. Whatever it was, you had to be able to find it when you needed it. Josh never knew what he would find. At one practice, Quentin watched him go up against Elliot over one of the 2 metal squares on the board. These were made of a tarnished, silvery stuff. One actually was silver, the other was palladium, whatever that was, with fine swirling lines and tiny italic words etched into them. Elliot had chosen a fairly basic enchantment that created a small, softly glowing orb. Josh attempted a counterspell, muttering it half-heartedly while sketching a few cursory gestures with his large fingers. He always looked embarrassed when he cast spells, as if he never believed they were actually going to work. But as he finished, the day went slightly faded and sepia-toned, the way it might if a cloud drifted in front of the sun, or in the first moments of an eclipse.
What the hell? What it the hell?
Josh had successfully defended the square. He'd abolished Elliot's will-o'-the-wisp, but he'd gone too far. Somehow he'd created its inverse, a black hole. He'd punched a drain hole in the afternoon, and the daylight was swirling into it. The 5 physical kids gathered around in the amber light to look as if it were some unusual and possibly venomous beetle. Quentin had never seen anything quite like it. It was like some heavy-duty appliance had been turned on somewhere, sucking up the energy needed to light the world and causing a local brownout.
How you like me now? Huh? How do you like Josh now?
Wow. Josh, what is that thing?
I don't know. I just waved my little fingers.
He waggled his fingers in Elliot's face. A soft breeze was kicking up.
Okay, Josh, you got me. Shut it down.
Had enough? Is it too real for you, Magic Man?
Worried. Seriously, Josh. Please get rid of that thing. It's creeping us out.
By now, the whole field was plunged in deep twilight. Even though it was only 2 in the afternoon, Quentin couldn't look directly at the space above the metal square. But the air around it looked wavy and distorted, the grass behind it distant and smeared. Underneath it, in a perfect circle that could have been ruled by a compass, the blades of grass were standing up perfectly straight, like splinters of green glass. The vortex drifted lazily to one side, toward the edge of the board, and a nearby oak tree leaned toward it with a monstrous creaking sound.
Josh, don't be an idiot.
Josh had stopped celebrating. He watched his creation nervously.
Josh.
All right already. All right.
Josh scrubbed out the spell and the hole in space vanished. He looked pale but regretful, resentful. They'd pissed on his parade. They stood silent in a half circle around the half-toppled oak. One of its longest branches almost touched the ground. Neutral Dean Fogg arranged an entire tournament schedule of weekend welters matches, culminating in a school championship at the end of the semester. To their surprise, the physical kids tended to win their games. They even beat the snobby, standoffish psychic group who made up for any shortfalls in their spellcasting ability with their uncannily prescient strategic instincts. Their run of success continued through October. Their only real rivals were the natural magic group, who in spite of their pacifist, sylvan ethos were annoyingly hyper-competitive about welters. Bit by bit, the summer atmosphere of balmy congeniality evaporated as the afternoons got colder and shorter and the demands of the game started to conflict with their already crushing academic workload. After a while, welters became a chore just like anything else, except even more meaningless. As Quentin and the other physical kids became less enthusiastic, Janet got shriller and pushier about the game, and her shrill pushiness became less endearing. She couldn't help it, it was just her neurotic need to control everything coming out to play, but that didn't make it any less of a pain in the ass for the rest of them. Theoretically, they could have gotten out of it by tanking a match. It would only have taken one, but they didn't. Nobody quite had the heart, or the guts. But Josh's inconsistency continued to be a problem. On the morning of the final game of the season, he didn't show up at all. It was a Saturday morning in early November, and they were playing for the school championship, what Fogg had grandly christened the Brakebills Cup, although so far he hadn't produced any actual physical vessel that answered to that name. The grass around the welters field was tricked out with 2 ranks of grimly festive wooden bleachers that looked like something out of old newsreel footage of college sporting events, and which had probably been lying disassembled in numbered sections in some unimaginably dusty storeroom for decades. There was even a VIP box occupied by Dean Fogg and Professor Vander Wegge, who clutched a coffee cup in her pink-mittened hands. The sky was gray, and a heavy wind made the leaves seethe in the trees. The gonfalons, in Brakebills blue and brown, strung along the backs of the bleachers, fluttered and snapped. The grass was crunchy with frozen dew.
Worried where the hell is he?
I don't know.
Janet had her arms around Elliot's neck, clinging to him for warmth, which Elliot put up with irritably.
Fuck him, let's start. I want to get this over with.
We can't without Josh.
Who says we can't? We're better off without him anyway.
I'd rather lose with him than win without him. Anyway, he's not dead. I saw him just after breakfast.
If he doesn't show up soon, we're all going to die of exposure. He'll be the only one left alive to carry on our glorious fight.
Worried Josh's absence made Quentin worried about what he didn't know.
I'll go find him.
Don't be ridiculous. He's probably...
At that moment, the officiating faculty member, a hale, brick-colored man named Professor Foxtree, strode up to them, wrapped in an ankle-length down parka. Students respected him instinctively because of his easy good humor and because he was tall and Native American.
What's the holdup?
We're short a player, sir. Josh Hoberman is MIA.
So, let's get this shit show on the road. I'd like to be back in the senior common room by lunchtime. How many do you have?
4, sir.
3, actually. Sorry, sir, but I have to find Josh. He should be here.
He didn't wait for an answer but set off back toward the house at a jog, his hands in his pockets, his collar turned up around his ears to block out the cold.
Come on, Q. Shit.
I didn't know whether to be pissed off at Josh or worried about him, so I was both. Foxtree was right. It wasn't like the game actually mattered. Maybe the bastard just overslept. At least he had his fat to keep him warm. The fat bastard.
But Josh wasn't in his bed. His room was a maelstrom of books and paper and laundry. As usual, some of it floating loosely in midair. Quentin walked down to the sunroom, but its only occupant was the aged Professor Brzezinski, the potions expert, who sat at the window, eyes closed, drenched in sun, his white beard flowing down over his stained old apron. An enormous fly bounced against one of the window panes. He looked asleep, but when Quentin was almost out the door, he spoke.
Neutral. Yes, sir. Josh Hoberman. He's late for Welter's.
The old man waved Quentin over with a blue-veined hand and fumbled a colored pencil and a piece of lined paper out of the pocket of his apron. With sure, rapid strokes, Professor Brzezinski sketched a rough outline of the Brakebills campus. He muttered a few words in French and made a sign over it with one hand like a compass rose. He held it up.
Not a lot, sir. I don't see anything.
Quentin had spent very little time in the Brakebills library. Hardly anybody did if they could help it. Visiting scholars had been so aggressive over the centuries in casting locator spells to find the books they wanted, and spells of concealment to hide those same books from rival scholars, that the entire area was more or less opaque to magic, like a palimpsest that has been scribbled on over and over, past the point of legibility. To make matters worse, some of the books had actually become migratory. In the 19th century, Brakebills had appointed a librarian with a highly romantic imagination who had envisioned a mobile library in which the books fluttered from shelf to shelf like birds, reorganizing themselves spontaneously under their own power in response to searches. For the first few months, the effect was said to have been quite dramatic. A painting of the scene survived as a mural behind the circulation desk with enormous atlases soaring around the place like condors. But the system turned out to be totally impractical. The wear and tear on the spines alone was too costly, and the books were horribly disobedient. The librarian had imagined he could summon a given book to perch on his hand just by shouting out its call number, but in actuality they were just too willful, and some were actively predatory. The librarian was swiftly deposed and his successor set about domesticating the books again. But even now there were stragglers, notably in Swiss History and Architecture 31399, that stubbornly flapped around near the ceiling. Once in a while, an entire subcategory that had long been thought safely dormant would take wing with an indescribable papery susurrus. So the library was mostly empty, and it wasn't hard to spot Josh in an alcove off the second floor, sitting at a small square table across from a tall, cadaverously thin man with chiseled cheekbones and a pencil mustache. The man wore a black suit that hung on him. He looked like an undertaker. Quentin recognized the thin man. He was the magical bric-a-brac dealer who turned up once or twice a year at Brakebills in his woody station wagon, loaded down with a bizarre collection of charms and fetishes and relics. His name was Lovelady. He turned up again shortly after the incident with the beast, and some of the younger kids bought charms to protect themselves in the event of another attack. But Josh knew better than that. Or Quentin would have thought so. But as he started toward them, he knocked his forehead against a hard, invisible barrier. Whatever it was cool and squeaked like clean glass. It was soundproof too. He could see their lips moving, but the alcove was silent. He caught Josh's eye. There was a quick exchange with Lovelady, who peered over his shoulder at Quentin. Lovelady didn't look happy, but he picked up what looked like an ordinary glass tumbler that had been standing upside down on the table and flipped it over. The barrier vanished.
Hey, what's up?
What's going on? You know we have a match this morning, right?
Oh, man, right, game time. How long do we have?
About negative half an hour.
Oh, man. Got anything for time travel? Time turner or something?
Not at this time, but I will make inquiries.
Awesome. Send me an owl.
Come on, they're waiting for us. Fogg is freezing his ass off.
Good for him. Too much ass on that man anyway.
Quentin got Josh out of the library and heading toward the rear of the house, though he was moving slowly and with a worrying tendency to lurch into door frames and occasionally into Quentin. He did an abrupt about-face.
Hang on. Gotta get my Quidditch costume. I mean uniform. I mean welters.
We don't have uniforms.
I know that. I'm drunk. I'm not delusional. I still need my winter coat.
Jesus, man. It's not even 10 o'clock.
Experiment. Thought it might relax me for the big game.
Yeah? Really? How's that working out for you?
It was just a little scotch, for Christ's sake. My parents sent me a bottle of Lagavulin for my birthday. Elliot's the lush around here, not me. Relax. I know what I can handle.
Yeah, you're handling the hell out of it.
Oh, who gives a shit? You were probably hoping I wouldn't show up and blow your precious game for you. I just wish you had the balls to admit it. God, you should hear Elliot do you behind your back. You're, much of a cheerleader, as Janet is. At least she has the tits for it.
If I wanted to win, I would have left you in the library. Everybody else wanted to.
He waited in the doorway, furious, arms folded, while Josh rifled through his clothes. He snatched his coat off the back of a desk chair, causing the chair to fall over. He let it lie there. Quentin wondered if it was true about Elliot. If Josh was trying to hurt him, he certainly knew where to stick the knife in. They set off down the hall together in silence.
All right. Look, you know how I'm kind of a fuck-up, right?
Quentin said nothing. Stone-faced. He didn't feel like playing into Josh's personal drama right now.
Well, I am. And don't bother with the self-esteem lecture. It's gone so far beyond what you even want to know about. I've always been a smart guy, but I'm a low grades / high test scores kind of smart guy. If it wasn't for Fob, they would have kicked me out after last semester.
No troll? Right.
Look, all the rest of you can go around playing Peter Perfect, and that's fine, but I have to work my ass off just to stay here. If you saw my grades, you guys don't even know the alphabet goes that high?
We all have to work at it. Well, except Elliot.
Yeah. But it's fun for you. You get off on it. That's your thing. Fuck, it's cold. Look, I love it here, but I'm not going to make it on my own. I just don't know where it comes from.
With no warning, he grabbed the front of Quentin's coat and pushed him up against the wall of the house.
Don't you get it? I don't know where it comes from. I do a spell. I don't know if it's going to work or not. You look for the power, and it's just there. Me? I never know. I never know if it's going to be there when I need it. It comes, and it goes, and I don't even know why.
Okay. Jesus. You're hurting my man boobs.
Josh let go of him and stalked off in the direction of the maze. Quentin caught up with him.
So you thought Lovelady could help?
I thought he could. I don't know. Give me a little boost. Just make it so I could count on it a little more.
By selling you some trash he got off eBay.
You know, he has interesting connections. They act all superior when we're watching, but some of the faculty buy from Lovelady. I heard a couple of years ago Van der Wege bought an old brass door knocker off him that turned out to be a hand of Oberon. Chambers uses it to cut down trees around the sea. I thought he could sell me a charm, something to bring my grades up. I know I act like I don't care, but I want to stay here, Quentin. I don't want to go back out there.
I want you to stay too. But Lovelady Jesus, maybe you are an idiot. Why didn't you just go to Elliot for help?
Elliot, he's the last guy I'd talk to. Don't you see how he looks at me in class? A guy like that okay? He's had it tough in lots of ways. But this isn't the kind of thing he understands.
What did Lovelady try to sell you?
Bunch of old dust bunnies. Bastard told me they were Aleister Crowley's ashes.
What were you going to do with them anyway? Snort them?
They pushed their way through the scrim of trees around the field. It was a grim scene. Elliot and Janet were huddled at one end of the board looking bedraggled and thoroughly chilled. Poor Alice was out on the board, squatting on a stone square and hugging herself miserably. The natural magic group was at the other end. Despite the physical kids' shortfall, they had chosen to field the full 5 players. Not very sportsmanlike. It was hard to see their faces in an effort to intimidate their opponents. They wore hooded druid robes that somebody had sewn together out of a bunch of green velvet curtains. They weren't made to get wet. The physical kids gave a ragged cheer when Josh and Quentin appeared.
My heroes. Where did you find him?
Somewhere warm and dry.
They were being beaten badly, but Josh's surprise reappearance revived their fighting spirit. On his first turn, Josh went for the silver square, and after 5 solid minutes of Gregorian-esque chanting, he improbably brought into being a fiery elemental, a slow-moving, woodchuck-sized salamander that looked like it was constructed out of glowing orange embers and which went on to laconically capture 2 adjacent squares for good measure. It then settled down on its 6 legs to smolder and watch the rest of the match, raindrops sizzling and skating off its charred scales. The physical kids' comeback had the unfortunate effect of lengthening the game beyond all possibility of enjoyment. It was the longest game they'd played all season. It was shaping up to be the longest Welter's game anybody could remember. Finally, after another hour, the handsome Scandinavian-looking captain of the natural team, whom Quentin was pretty sure Janet used to date-toad the edge of the sand square he stood on, gathered his wet velvet robe around him regally and caused an elegantly twisted little olive tree to curl up out of a grass square in the physical's home row.
Suck it! That's the win. Unless you physicals can match it, if not, then this damn game is finally over. Somebody throw the globe.
Come on, Q. My fingernails are blue. My lips are probably blue.
Your balls are probably blue.
He picked up the heavy marble from where it rested in a stone bowl by the edge of the board. He looked around at the strange scene he stood at the center of. They were still in it. They'd been down, but they'd come almost all the way back, and he hardly ever missed with the globe. Mercifully, there was no wind, but a mist was gathering, and it was getting hard to see the far end of the board. The afternoon was silent except for the dripping of the trees.
Quentin!
The dean was still up in the VIP box, gamely miming enthusiasm. He blew his nose loudly into a silk handkerchief. The sun was a distant memory.
Thoughtful, all at once a pleasant feeling of lightness and warmth came over me. It was so vivid and so divorced from the freezing cold reality all around me that I wondered if somebody was doing some surreptitious magic on me. I looked suspiciously at the smoldering salamander, but it loftily ignored me. There was the familiar sense of the world narrowing to the limits of the board, trees and people shrinking and curving away around it, becoming silvery, solarized. My view took in the miserable Josh, pacing by the edge of the board and taking deep breaths, and Janet, who was clenching her jaw and jutting it at me fiercely, hungrily, her arm through Elliot's, whose eyes were fixed on some invisible scenery in the middle distance. Thoughtful, it all felt very far away. None of it mattered. That was the funny thing. It was incredible that I hadn't seen it before. I would have to try and explain this to Josh. I had done a terrible, stupid thing in the classroom the day Amanda Orloff had died, and I would never get over it. But I'd figured out how to live with it. You just had to get some idea of what matters, and what doesn't, and how much, and try not to be scared of the stuff that doesn't. Put it in perspective. Something like that. Or, otherwise, what was the point? I didn't know if I could explain it to Josh, but maybe I could show him.
Quentin took off his coat as if he were sloughing off a scratchy, too small skin. He rolled his shoulders in the cold air. He knew it would be freezing in a minute, but for the moment it was just refreshing. He sighted on the blonde natural player in his idiotic robe, leaned to one side and slung the globe sidearm at his knee. It hit the heavy velvet with an audible thump.
Suck it.
He whipped his shirt off over his head, ignoring the rising yelps of dismay on all sides. It was so easy to ignore people when you understood how little power they really had over you. He walked over to where Alice stood, dumbstruck on her square. He would probably regret this later, but God, it was good to be a magician sometimes. He hoisted her over his shoulder fireman style and jumped with her into the freezing, cleansing water. Marie by Rhine time. Quentin had been wondering about the mystery of the fourth year ever since he got to Brakebills. Everybody did. The basic facts were common knowledge. Every year in September, half the fourth years swiftly and silently disappeared from the house overnight. No one discussed their absence. The vanished fourth years reappeared at the end of December looking thin and drawn and generally chewed over, to no particular comment. It was considered fatally bad form to say anything about it. They quietly mixed back into the general Brakebills population, and that was that. The rest of the fourth years vanished in January and came back at the end of April. Now the first semester of Quentin's fourth year was almost over, and he had acquired not one single new piece of information about what happened during that interval. The secret of where they went and what they did there, or what was done to them, was improbably well kept. Even students who took nothing else at Brakebill seriously were passionately serious on that one point. Dude, I'm not even kidding. You so don't want to be asking me about that? The disaster of the beast had thrown off the previous year's schedule. The regular contingent of fourth years had departed for the first semester. They were gone when it happened. But the second semester group, which included Elliot, Janet, and Josh, had finished out the year at Brakebills as usual. To the extent that they speculated about it, they called themselves the Spared. Apparently, whatever the faculty had in store for them was nasty enough as it was without the added threat of assault by an interdimensional carnivore, but now it was back to business as usual. This year, half the fourth years departed on schedule, along with a handful of the fifth years. The 10 spared had been split up between the two semesters, 5 and 5. Whether by accident or by design, the physical kids would all be shipping out together in January. Was a regular topic of conversation around the battered billiard table in the cottage.
You know what I bet? I bet they make us go to normal college.
Just some random state school where we have to read Cannery Row and debate the Stamp Act. And like, the second day Elliot's going to be crying in the bathroom and begging for his foie gras and his Malbec while some jock sodomizes him with a lacrosse stick.
Did that just turn into your total gay fantasy halfway through?
I have it on good authority, on the best of authority, that the whole fourth year enigma is a front. It's all a hoax to scare off the faint of heart. You spend the whole semester on Fogg's private island in the Maldives, contemplating the infinities of the multiverse in grains of fine white beach sand, while coolies bring you rum and tonics.
I don't think they have coolies in the Maldives. It's been an independent republic since 1965.
So how come everybody comes back all skinny?
That's from all the skinny dipping.
Hork.
Quentin should be good at that.
Your fat ass could use some skinny dipping.
Can't I get a doctor's note or something? Like when they let the Christian kids out of sex ed? Isn't anybody else worried?
Oh, I'm terrified. I'm not strong like the rest of you. I'm weak. I'm a delicate flower.
Don't worry, delicate flower. Suffering will make you strong.
They came for Quentin one night in January. He knew what would happen at night. It was always at breakfast that they noticed that the fourth years were gone. It must have been 2 or 3 in the morning, but he woke up instantly when Professor van der Wegen knocked on his door. He knew what was going on. The sound of her husky European voice in the darkness reminded him of his first night at Brakebills, when she'd put him to bed after his examination.
It's time, Quentin. We are going up to the roof. Do not bring anything.
He stepped into his slippers. Outside, a file of silent, rumpled Brakebills students stood on the stairs. Nobody spoke as Professor van der Wegen led them through a door in a stretch of wall that Quentin could have sworn had been blank the day before, between a pair of 10-foot-high oil paintings of clipper ships foundering in heavy seas. They shuffled up the dark wooden stairs without speaking, 15 of them, 10 fourth years, 5 leftover fifth years, every one wearing identical navy blue Brakebills issue pajamas. Despite van der Wegen's orders, Gretchen sullenly gripped a worn black teddy bear along with her cane. Up ahead of them, Professor van der Wegen banged open a wooden trapdoor, and they filed out onto the roof. It was an awkward perch, a long, narrow, windy strip with a shingled drop falling away steeply on either side. A low wrought iron fence ran along the edge, providing absolutely no protection or reassurance whatsoever. In fact, it was the perfect height to take you out at the knees if you accidentally backed into it. The night was bittingly cold with a lively cross breeze. The sky was lightly frosted with high, wind-whisked clouds luridly backlit by a gibbous moon. Quentin hugged himself. Still nobody had said a word. No one even looked at anybody else. It was like they were all still half asleep, and a single word would have shattered the delicate dream in which they walked. Even the other physical kids were like strangers.
Everyone take off your pajamas.
Weirdly, they did. Everything was so surreal and trance-like already that it made perfect sense that they would all, guys and girls alike, get naked in front of each other in the freezing cold without a hint of self-consciousness. Afterward, Quentin even remembered Alice putting a warm hand on his bare shoulder to steady herself as she stepped out of her pajama bottoms. Soon they were naked and shivering, their bare backs and buttocks pale in the moonlight, the starlit campus rolling away far below them, with the dark trees of the forest beyond. Some of the students clutched their pajamas in both hands, but Professor van der Weeke instructed them to drop them in a heap at their feet. Quentin's blew away and disappeared over the ledge, but he didn't try to stop them. It didn't matter. She moved down the line, dabbing a generous gob of chalky white paste on each forehead and both shoulders with her thumb as she passed. When she was done, she walked back the other way, lining them up, checking her work, making sure they were standing up straight. Finally, she called out a single harsh syllable. Instantly, a huge soft weight pressed down on Quentin, settling on his shoulders, bending him forward. He crouched down, straining against it. He tried to fight it, to lift it. It was crushing him. He bit back panic. It flashed through his brain. The beast was back. But this was different. As he doubled over, he felt his knees folding up into his belly, merging with it. Why wasn't Professor van der Weeke helping them? Quentin's neck was stretching and stretching out and forward out of his control. It was grotesque, a horrible dream. He wanted to vomit but couldn't. His toes were melting and flowing together, his fingers were elongating enormously and spreading out, and something soft and warm was bursting out of his arms and chest, covering him completely. His lips pouted grotesquely and hardened. The narrow strip of roof rose up to meet him, and then the weight was gone. He squatted on the gray slate roof, breathing hard. At least he didn't feel cold anymore. He looked at Alice, and Alice looked back at him. But it wasn't Alice anymore. She had become a large gray goose, and so had he. Professor van der Weeke moved down the line again. With both hands, she picked up each student in turn and threw him or her bodily off the roof. They all, in spite of the shock or because of it, reflexively spread out their wings and caught the air before they could be snared by the bare, grasping treetops below. One by one, they sailed away into the night. When it was his turn, Quentin honked in protest. Professor van der Weeke's human hands were hard and scary and burned against his feathers. He shat on her feet in panic, but then he was in the air and tumbling. He spread his wings and beat his way up into the sky, thrashing and punishing the air till it bore him up. It would have been impossible not to. Quentin's new goose brain, it emerged, was not much given to reflection. His senses now tracked only a handful of key stimuli, but it tracked those very, very closely. This body was made for either sitting or flying, not much else. And as it happened, Quentin was in a mood to fly. In fact, he felt like flying more than he had ever felt like doing anything in his entire life. With no conscious thought or apparent effort, he and his classmates fell into the classic ragged V formation with a fourth year named Georgia at the apex. Georgia was the daughter of the receptionist at a car dealership in Michigan, and she had come here against her family's will. Unlike Quentin, she had confessed fully the nature of Brakebills, and as a reward for her honesty, Georgia's parents had tried to have her committed. Thanks to Fogg's subtle spellcraft, Georgia's parents believed her to be attending a vocational institute for troubled adults. Now Georgia, whose discipline was an obscure branch of healing roughly analogous to endocrinology, and who wore her wiry black hair cinched at the back with a tortoiseshell barrette, was leading them southward, her brand new wings pumping vigorously. It was just chance. Any one of them could have led the flock. Quentin was vaguely aware that although he'd lost the lion's share of his cognitive capacity in the transformation, he'd also picked up a couple of new senses. One had to do with air. He could perceive wind speed and direction and air temperature as clearly as whirls of smoke in a wind tunnel. The sky now appeared to him as a three-dimensional map of currents and eddies, friendly rising heat plumes and dense, dangerous sinks of cool air. He could feel the prickle of distant cumulus clouds swapping bursts of positive and negative electrical charge. Quentin's sense of direction had sharpened too, to the point where it felt like he had a finely engineered compass floating in oil, perfectly balanced, at the center of his brain. He could feel invisible tracks and rails extending away from him through the air in all directions into the blue distance. They were the Earth's lines of magnetic force, and it was along one of these rails that Georgia was leading them. She was taking them south. By dawn, they were a mile up and doing 60 miles an hour, overtaking cars on the Hudson Parkway below them. They passed New York City, a stony incrustation crackling with alien heat and electrical sparks and exuding toxic flatulence. They flew all day, following the coastline, past Trenton and Philadelphia, sometimes over sea, sometimes over frozen fields, surfing the temperature gradients, boosted by updrafts, transferring seamlessly from current to current as one petered out and the next one kicked in. It felt fantastic. Quentin couldn't imagine stopping. He couldn't believe how strong he was, how many wing beats he had stored up in his iron chest muscles. He just couldn't contain himself. He had to talk about it.
Honk! Honk, honk! Honk, 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 honk!
His classmates agreed. Quentin was shuffled up and down the V in an orderly fashion, in more or less the same way a volleyball team rotates serve. Sometimes they plonked down and rested and fed in a reservoir or a highway median or a badly drained spot on the lawn of a suburban office park. Landscaping errors were pure gold to geese. Not infrequently, they shared these priceless scraps of real estate with other Vs, real geese who, sensing their transformed nature, regarded them with polite amusement. Quentin couldn't have said. Once in a while he caught sight of a land formation he recognized, and he tried to calculate time and distance. If they flew at such and such a speed, and the Chesapeake Bay was so many miles south of New York City, the next number of days must have passed since… What again exactly? The X's and blanks and other equationally such and such as stubbornly refused to fill themselves in. They didn't want to do their dance. Quentin's goose brain didn't have the hardware to handle numbers, nor was it interested in whatever point those numbers were supposed to prove anyway. They had gone far enough south now that the weather was perceptibly warmer, and then they went farther still. They went south over the Florida Keys, dry, crusty little nubbins barely poking their heads up out of the ceaselessly lapping turquoise, then out over the Caribbean, bypassing Cuba, farther south than any sensible goose had license to go. They overflew the Panama Canal, no doubt causing any birdwatchers who happened to spot them to shake their heads at the lost little V as they dutifully logged it in their bird journals. Days, weeks, maybe months and years passed. Who knew or cared? Quentin had never experienced peace and satisfaction like this. He forgot about his human past, about Brakebills and Brooklyn and James and Julia and Penny and Dean Fogg. Why hang on to them? He had no name anymore. He barely had any individual identity, and he didn't want one. What good were such human artifacts? He was an animal. His job was to turn bugs and plants into muscle and fat and feathers and flight and miles logged. He served only his flock fellows and the wind and the laws of Darwin, and he served whatever force sent him gliding along the invisible magnetic rails, always southward, down the rough, stony coast of Peru, spiny Andes on his port, the sprawling blue Pacific on his starboard. He had never been happier. Though it was tougher going now, they splashed down more rarely and in more exotic locales, widely spaced way stations that must have been picked out for them in advance. He'd be cruising along a mile and a half up, one eye monitoring the rocky rough of the Andes, feeling his empty belly and the ache in his chest muscles, when something would twinkle in the forest 100 miles down the line, and sure enough they'd happen upon a freshly flooded soccer field or an abandoned swimming pool in some Shining Path warlord's ruined villa, rainwater having diluted almost to nothing the lingering chemical tang of chlorine. It was getting colder again after their long tropical interlude. Peru gave way to Chile and the grassy, wind-ruffled Patagonian pampas. They were a lean flock now, their fat reserves depleted, but nobody turned aside or hesitated for a second as they plunged suicidally south from the tip of Cape Horn, out over the terrifying blue chaos of Drake Passage. The invisible highway they rode would brook no swerving. There was no playful intra-flock honking now. Quentin glanced over once at the other branch of the V to see Janet's black button eye burning with furious determination opposite him. They overnighted on a miraculous barge adrift in deep water and loaded with good things, watercress and alfalfa and clover. When the bleak gray shore of Antarctica heaved up over the horizon, they regarded it not with relief but with collective resignation. This was no respite. There were no goose names for this country because geese didn't come here, or if they did, they never came back. He could see magnetic tracks and rails converging in the air here, carving in from far away on either side like the longitude lines that come crowding together at the bottom of a globe. The Brakebills V flew high, the wrinkled gray swells telescopically clear below them through 2 miles of dry, salted air. Instead of a beach, a fringe of tumbled boulders crammed with bizarre, unintelligible penguins crept by. then blank white ice, the frozen skull of the earth. Quentin was tired. The cold tore at his little body through its thin feathery jacket. He no longer knew what was keeping them aloft. If one of them dropped, he knew they would all give up, just fold their wings, and dive for the porcelain white snow, which would happily devour them. And then the rail they followed dipped like a dowser's rod. It angled them downward, and they slipped and slid gratefully down it, accepting a loss of altitude in exchange for speed and blessed relief from the effort of maintaining height with their burning wings. Quentin could see now that there was a stone house there in the snow, an anomaly in the otherwise featureless plain. It was a place of men, and ordinarily Quentin would have feared it, crapped on it, and then blown by it and forgotten it. But no, there was no question. Their track ended there. It buried itself in one of the stone house's many snowy roofs. They were close enough now that Quentin could see a man standing on one of them, waiting for them, holding a long straight staff. The urge to fly from him was strong, but exhaustion, and above all the magnetic logic of the track, were stronger. At the very last second, he cupped his stiffened wings and they caught the air like a sail, snatching up the last of his kinetic energy and breaking his fall. He plopped onto the snow roof and lay there gasping at the thin atmosphere. His eyes went dull. The human hadn't moved. Well, fuck him! He could do what he wanted with them, pluck them and gut them and stuff them and roast them. Quentin didn't care anymore as long as he could just have one blessed moment of rest for his aching wings. The man shaped a strange syllable with his fleshy, beakless lips and tapped the base of his staff on the roof. 15 pale, naked human teenagers lay in the snow under the white polar sun. Quentin woke up in a bare white bedroom. He could not have guessed in the nearest 24 hours how long he'd been asleep. His chest and arms felt bruised and achy. He looked at his crude, pink human hands, with their stubby, featherless fingers. He brought them up to touch his face. He sighed and resigned himself to being a man again. There was very little in the bedroom, and all of it was white. The bedclothes, the whitewashed walls, the coarse drawstring pajamas he wore, the white-painted iron bedstead, the slippers waiting for him on the cold stone floor. From the small square window, Quentin could see he was on the second floor. His view was of broken snowfields beneath a white sky, stretching out to the horizon, a meaningless, abstract white line, an unjudgeable distance away. My God! What had he gotten himself into? Quentin shuffled out into the corridor, still in his pajamas and a thin robe he'd found hanging on a hook on the back of the door. He found his way downstairs into a quiet, airy hall with a timbered ceiling. It was identical to the dining hall at Brakebills, but the vibe was different, more like an alpine ski lodge. A long table with benches ran most of the length of the hall. Quentin sat down. A man sat alone at one end of the table, nursing a mug of coffee and staring bleakly at the picked-over remains of a lavish breakfast. He was sandy-haired, tall but round-shouldered, with a weak chin and the beginnings of a paunch. His dressing gown was much whiter and fluffier than Quentin's. His eyes were a pale, watery green.
Neutral, I let you sleep. Most of the others are already up.
Neutral? Thanks.
You are at Brakebills South. We are about 500 miles from the South Pole. You flew in over the Bellingshausen Sea on your way in from Chile over a region called Ellsworth Land. They call this part of Antarctica, Marie Byrd Land. Admiral Byrd named it after his wife.
Where's everybody else?
I gave them the morning. Classes begin in the afternoon.
What kind of classes?
What kind of classes? Here at Brakebills South, you will begin your education in magic. Or I suppose you thought that was what you were doing with Professor Fogg.
Yes, I did think that.
You are here to internalize the essential mechanisms of magic. You think that you have been studying magic. You have practiced your popper and memorized your conjugations and declensions and modifications. What are the 5 tertiary circumstances?
Altitude, age, position of the Pleiades, phase of the moon, nearest body of water.
Very good. Magnificent. You are a genius.
Thank you.
You have been studying magic the way a parrot studies Shakespeare. You recite it like you are saying the Pledge of Allegiance. But you do not understand it.
I don't?
To become a magician, you must do something very different. You cannot study magic. You cannot learn it. You must ingest it, digest it. You must merge with it, and it with you. When a magician casts a spell, He does not first mentally review the major, minor, tertiary, and quaternary circumstances. He does not search his soul to determine the phase of the moon and the nearest body of water and the last time he wiped his ass. When he wishes to cast a spell, he simply casts it. When he wishes to fly, he simply flies. When he wants the dishes done, they simply are.
You need to do more than memorize, Quentin. You must learn the principles of magic with more than your head.
You must learn them with your bones, with your blood, your liver, your heart, your deek.
We are going to submerge the language of spell casting deep into who you are so that you have it always wherever you are, whenever you need it, not just when you have studied for a test.
You are not going on a mystical adventure here, Quentin. This process will be long and painful and humiliating and very, very boring. It is a task best performed in silence and isolation. That is the reason for your presence here. You will not enjoy the time you spend at Brakebills South. I do not encourage you to try.
So how do I do that? Learn things in my bones? Or whatever.
It is very hard. Not everybody does. Not everybody can.
Worried, What happens if I can't?
Nothing. You go back to Brakebills. You graduate. You spend your life as a second-rate magician. Many do. Probably you never realize it. Even the fact that you failed is beyond your ability to comprehend.
Worried Quentin had no intention of letting that happen to him, though it occurred to him that probably nobody actually set out to have that happen to them. And, statistically speaking, it had to happen to somebody. The hash browns no longer tasted quite so scrumptious. He put his fork down.
Stand back.
Quentin's fingers were still stiff and sore from having served as wings, but he picked up a sharp knife that looked decently balanced, carefully cleaned it off with a napkin, and held it between the last 2 fingers in his left hand. He spun it finger by finger as far as his thumb, then he tossed it up almost to the ceiling, still spinning, careful to let it pass between 2 rafters, with the idea that it would fall and bury itself in the table between the 3rd and 4th fingers of his outstretched left hand. This was best done without looking, maintaining eye contact with his audience for maximum effect. Quentin's breakfast companion picked up a loaf of bread and stuck it out so that the falling knife speared it. He tossed loaf and knife contemptuously on the table.
You take stupid risks. Go on and join your friends. I think you will find them on the roof of the West Tower.
Okay, Mr. Funny Laughs. You're the boss.
He stood up. The stranger stood up too and shuffled off in another direction. He had the air of a disappointed man. Stone for stone, board for board, Brakebills South was the same house as the house at Brakebills, which was reassuring in a way. But it was incongruous to find what looked like an 18th century English country house planted in the middle of a soaring Antarctic wasteland. The roof of the West Tower was broad and round and paved with smooth flagstones with a stone wall running around the edge. It was open to the elements, but some kind of magical arrangement kept the air warm and humid and protected it from the wind, or mostly. Quentin imagined he could feel a deep chill lurking underneath the warmth somewhere. The air was tepid, but the floor, the furniture, everything he touched was cool and clammy. It was like being in a warm greenhouse in the dead of winter. As promised, the rest of the Brakebills group was up there, standing around dazed in 3s and 4s, staring out at the snowpack and talking in low tones, bathed in the eerie, even Antarctic light. They looked different. Their waists were trimmer, and their shoulders and chests were sturdier, huskier. They'd lost fat and packed on muscle during their flight south. Their jaws and cheekbones were sharply defined. Alice looked lovely and gaunt and lost.
Honk, 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 honk.
People laughed, though Quentin had the impression she'd already made that joke a few times.
Hey, man. Is this place fucked up or what?
Doesn't seem so bad. What time is skinny dipping?
I might have been a little off base with that. We did all get naked anyway.
They were all wearing identical white pajamas. Quentin felt like an inmate in an insane asylum. He wondered if Elliot was missing his secret boyfriend of the moment, whoever it was.
I ran into Nurse Ratch downstairs. He gave me a speech about how stupid I am, and how miserable he's going to make me.
You slept through our little meet and greet. That's Professor Mayakovsky.
Mayakovsky. Like Dean Mayakovsky?
He's the son. I always wondered what happened to him. Now we know.
The original Mayakovsky had been the most powerful magician in a wave of international faculty brought in during the 1930s and 1940s. Until then, Brakebills taught English and American magic almost exclusively, but in the 1930s a vogue for multicultural spellcasting had swept the school. Professors were imported at huge expense from around the world, the more remote the better. Skirt-wearing shamans from Micronesian dot islands, hunch-shouldered, hookah-puffing wizards from inner-city Cairo coffeehouses, blue-faced Tuareg necromancers from southern Morocco. Legend had it that Mayakovsky Sr. was recruited from a remote Siberian location, a cluster of frozen Soviet blockhouses where local shamanic traditions had hybridized with sophisticated Muscovite practices brought there by Gulag inmates.
I wonder how badly you have to fuck up to get this assignment.
Thoughtful, maybe he wanted it. Maybe he likes it here. Dude must be in creepy loner heaven.
Worried, I think you were right. I think I am going to be the first one to crack. I don't like it here. This stuff is giving me a rash.
He fingered the material of the Brakebills' South pajamas.
I think it might have a stain on it.
You'll be okay. You survived Oregon. Is this worse than Oregon?
Maybe if I ask nicely, he'll turn me back into a goose.
Oh my God. Never again. Do you realize? We ate bugs. We ate bugs.
What do you mean? Never again. How do you think we're getting back?
You know what I liked about being a goose? Being able to crap wherever I wanted.
I'm not going back. I could fly to Australia from here. Or New Zealand, the vineyards there are really coming along. Some nice sheep farmer will adopt me and feed me Sauvignon Blanc and turn my liver into a wonderful foie gras.
Maybe Professor Mayakovsky can turn you into a kiwi bird.
Kiwi birds can't fly.
Anyway, he didn't strike me as the kind of guy who's going to do us a lot of favors.
Thoughtful he must spend a lot of time alone. I wonder if we feel bad for him.
Honk, 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 honk.
There was no reliable way to measure time at Brakebills South. There were no clocks. And the sun was a dull white fluorescence permanently thumbtacked half an inch above the white horizon. It made Quentin think of the Watcherwoman, how she was always trying to stop time. She would have loved this place. That first morning they talked and mingled on the roof of the West Tower for what felt like hours, huddling together to cope with all the strangeness. Nobody felt like going back downstairs, even after they got tired of standing and ran out of things to talk about, so they all sat around the edge of the roof with their backs against the stone wall and just stared off into the pale, hazy distance, bathed in the weird, directionless, all-permeating white light reflecting off the snow. Quentin leaned his back against the cool stone and closed his eyes. He felt Alice put her head on his shoulder. If nothing else, he could hang on to her. Whatever else changed, she was always the same. They rested. What's Out the Magicians by Lev Grossman, cast by Our Tale Studio. Please subscribe to our channel if you enjoy listening. Later, it might have been minutes or hours or days, he opened his eyes.
The home week he tried to say something and discovered that he couldn't talk.
Some of the others were on their feet already. Professor Mayakovsky had appeared at the head of the stairs, his white bathrobe belted over his gut. He cleared his throat.
I've taken the liberty of depriving you of the power of speech.
He tapped his Adam's apple.
There will be no talking at Brakebills South. It is the hardest thing to adjust to, and I find it eases the transition if I simply prevent you from speaking for your first weeks here. But stand back, but for no other reason.
The class stared at him mutely. Mayakovsky seemed to be more comfortable now that nobody could answer back.
If you will all follow me downstairs, it is time for your first lesson.
Thoughtful, one thing had always confused Quentin about the magic he read about in books. It never seemed especially hard to do. There were lots of furrowed brows and thick books and long white beards and whatnot, but when it came right down to it, you memorized the incantation. or you just read it of F the page. If that was too much trouble, you collected the herbs, waved the wand, rubbed the lamp, mixed the potion, said the words, and just like that the forces of the beyond did your bidding. It was like making salad dressing or driving, stick, or assembling IKEA furniture. Just another skill you could learn. It took some time and effort, but compared to doing calculus, say, or playing the oboe well, there really was no comparison. Any idiot could do magic. Thoughtful, Quentin had been perversely relieved when he learned that there was more to it than that. Tia Lent was part of it, that silent, invisible exertion. He felt in his chest every time a spell came out right. But there was also work, hard work, mountains of it. Every spell had to be adjusted and modified in 100 ways according to the prevailing circumstances. They adorned the word with a capital letter at Brakebills under which it was cast. These circumstances could be just about anything. Magic was a complicated fiddly instrument that had to be calibrated precisely to the context in which it operated. Quentin had committed to memory dozens of pages of closely printed charts and diagrams spelling out the major circumstances and how they affected any given enchantment. And then, once you had all that down, there were hundreds of corollaries and exceptions to memorize too. Thoughtful as much as it was like anything, magic was like a language. And like a language, textbooks and teachers treated it as an orderly system for the purposes of teaching it, but in reality, it was complex and chaotic and organic. It obeyed rules only to the extent that it felt like it, and there were almost as many special cases and one-time variations as there were rules. These exceptions were indicated by rows of asterisks and daggers and other more obscure typographical fauna, which invited the reader to peruse the many footnotes that cluttered up the margins of magical reference books, like Tiamudic commentary.
It was Mayakovsky's intention to make them memorize all these minutiae, and not only to memorize them but to absorb and internalize them. The very best spellcasters had talent. He told his captive silent audience, but they also had unusual under-the-hood mental machinery, the delicate but powerful correlating and cross-checking engines necessary to access and manipulate and manage this vast body of information. That first afternoon, Quentin expected a lecture, but instead, when Mayakovsky was done jinxing their larynxes, he showed each of them to what looked like a monk's cell. A small stone room with a single high barred window, a single chair, and a single square wooden table. A shelf of magical reference books was bolted to one wall. It had the clean, industrious air of a room that had just been vigorously swept with a birch twig broom.
Sit.
Quentin sat. The professor placed in front of him one by one like a man setting up a chessboard, a hammer, a block of wood, a box of nails, a sheet of paper, and a small book bound in pale vellum. Mayakovsky tapped the paper. Everybody knew it. It was a standard teaching charm. While simple in theory, all it did was ensure that a hammered nail would go in straight. In one shot, it was extraordinarily persnickety to cast. It existed in literally thousands of permutations, depending on the circumstances. Casting Legrand was probably harder than just hammering the damn nail in the old-fashioned way, but it came in handy for didactic purposes. Mayakovsky tapped the book with a thick-nailed finger.
Neutral this book, each page describes a different set of circumstances. All different. Understand? Place, weather, stars, season, you will see. You turn the page, you cast the spell according to each set of circumstances. Good practice. I'll come back when you finish book. Korosho.
Mayakovsky's Russian accent was getting thicker as the day wore on. He was dropping his contractions and definite articles. He closed the door behind him. Quentin opened the book. Somebody not very creative had written "Abandon hope all ye" to enter here on the first page. Something told Quentin that Mayakovsky had noticed the graffiti, but let it stand. Soon, Quentin knew Legrand's hammer charm better than he wanted to know any spell ever. Page by page, the circumstances listed in the book became more and more esoteric and counterfactual. He cast Legrand's hammer charm at noon and at midnight in summer and winter on mountaintops and 1,000 yards beneath the Earth's surface. He cast the spell underwater and on the surface of the moon. He cast it in early evening during a blizzard on a beach on the island of Mangareva, which would almost certainly never happen since Mangareva is part of French Polynesia in the South Pacific. He cast the spell as a man, as a woman. And once was this really relevant? As a hermaphrodite. He cast it in anger, with ambivalence, and with bitter regret. By then, Quentin's mouth was dry. His fingertips were numb. He had pounded his thumb with the hammer 4 times. The block of wood was now crammed with flattened iron nail heads. Quentin groaned soundlessly and let his head loll back against the hard back of the chair. The door flew open, and Professor Mayakovsky entered carrying a jingling tray. He set the tray down on the desk. It supported a cup of hot tea, a tumbler of water, a plate with a pat of yeasty European butter and a thick slab of sourdough bread on it, and a glass containing what would turn out to be 2 fingers of peppery vodka, 1 finger of which Mayakovsky drank of himself before placing it on the table. When he was done, he slapped Quentin hard across the face.
That is for doubting yourself.
Quentin stared at him. He lifted a hand to his cheek, thinking,
This man is batshit insane. He could do anything to us out here.
Mayakovsky turned the book back to the first page again. He turned the piece of paper with the spell on it over and patted it. On the back was written another spell, Bujoled Sorceress Nail Extraction.
Begin again, please.
Wax on, wax of F.
When Mayakovsky was gone, Quentin stood up and stretched. Instead of beginning again, he went over to the tiny window looking out on the lunar snowfields. The sheer monochromaticity of the landscape was beginning to make him hallucinate colors. The sun had not moved at all. That was how Quentin's first month at Brakebills South went. The spells changed, and the circumstances were different, but the room was the same, and the days were always the same. Empty, relentless, interminable wastelands of repetition. Mayakovsky's ominous warnings had been entirely justified, and arguably a little understated. Even during his worst moments at Brakebills, Quentin had always had a niggling suspicion that he was getting away with something by being there, that the sacrifices asked of him by his instructors, however great, were cheap by comparison with the rewards of the life he could look forward to as a magician. At Brakebills South, for the first time, he felt like he was giving value for money, and he understood why they'd been sent here. What Mayakovsky was asking of them was impossible. The human brain was not meant to ingest these quantities of information. If Fogg had tried to enforce this regimen back at Brakebills, there would have been an insurrection. It was difficult to gauge how the others were holding up. They met at mealtimes and passed in the hall, but because of the prohibition against speech, there was no commiserating, just glances and shrugs and not much of that. Their gazes met bleakly over the breakfast table and turned away. Elliot's eyes were empty, and Quentin supposed his own probably looked the same way. Even Janet's animated features were set and frozen. No notes were exchanged. Whatever enchantment kept them from talking was global. Their pens wouldn't write. Quentin was losing interest in communicating anyway. He should have been ravenous for human contact, but instead he felt himself falling away from the others deeper inside himself. He fled like a prisoner from bedroom to dining room to solitary classroom, down the stone corridors under the tediously unblinking gaze of the white sun. Once he wandered up to the roof of the WSTOer and found one of the others, a gangly extrovert named Dale, putting on a mime show for a listless audience. But it really wasn't worth the effort of turning his head to follow what was going on. His sense of humor had died in the vastness. Professor Mayakovsky seemed to expect this as if he'd known it was going to happen. After the first 3 weeks, he announced that he had lifted the spell that kept them from talking. The news was received in silence. Nobody had noticed. Mayakovsky began to vary the routine. Most days were still devoted to grinding through the circumstances and their never dash-ending exceptions, but once in a while he introduced other exercises. In an empty hall, he erected a 3-dimensional maze composed of wire rings through which the students would levitate objects at speed. To sharpen their powers of concentration and control, at first they used marbles, then later steel balls only slightly narrower than the rings. When a ball brushed a ring, a spark cracked between them, and the spellcaster felt a shock. Later still, they would guide fireflies through the same maze, influencing their tiny insect minds by force of will. They watched one another do this in silence, feeling envy at one another's successes and contempt for one another's failures. The regime had divided them against each other. Janet in particular was bad at it. She tended to overpower her fireflies, to the point where they would crisp up in midair and become puffs of ash. Mayakovsky, stony-faced, just made her start over, while tears of wordless frustration ran down her face. This could and did go on for hours. No one could leave the hall before everyone had completed the exercise. They slept there more than once. Pufful. As the weeks went by and still no one spoke, they plowed deeper and deeper into areas of magic Quentin never thought he'd have the guts to try. They practiced transformations. He learned to unpack and parse the spell that had turned them into geese. Much of the trick, it turned out, was in shedding, storing, and then restoring the difference in body mass. They spent a hilarious afternoon as polar bears, wandering clumsily in a herd over the packed snow, swatting harmlessly at each other with giant yellow paws, encased as they were in layers of fur, hide, and fat. Their bare bodies felt clumsy and top-heavy, and they kept toppling over sideways onto their backs by accident. More hilarity. Nobody liked him, but it became apparent that Mayakovsky was no fraud. He could do things Quentin had never seen done at Brakebills, things he didn't think had been done for centuries. One afternoon he demonstrated, but did not allow them to try, a spell that reversed the flow of entropy. He smashed a glass globe and then neatly restored it again, like a film clip run in reverse. He popped a helium balloon and then knitted it back together and refilled it with its original helium atoms, in some cases fishing them from deep inside the lungs of spectators who had inhaled them. He used camphor to smother a spider. He showed no particular remorse about this dash, and then, frowning with the F fort, brought the spider back to life. Quentin watched the poor thing creep around in circles on the tabletop, hopelessly traumatized, making little dazed rushes at nothing, and then retreating to a corner, hunched up and twitching, while Mayakovsky moved on to another topic. One day, about 3 months into the semester, Mayakovsky announced that they would be transforming into Arctic foxes for the afternoon. It was an odd choice. They'd already done a few mammals, and it was no tougher than becoming a goose. But why quibble? Being an Arctic fox turned out to be a hell of a lot of fun. As soon as the change was an effect, Quentin shot out across the snowpack on his 4 twinkling paws. His little fox body was so fast and light, and his eyes were so close to the ground that it was like flying a high-performance jet at low altitude. Tiana ridges and crumbs of snow loomed up like mountains and boulders. He leaped over them and dodged around them and crashed through them. When he tried to turn, he was going so fast he skidded and wiped out in a huge plume of snow. The rest of the pack gleefully piled on top of him, yipping and yapping and snapping. It was an amazing outpouring of collective joy. Quentin had forgotten he was capable of that emotion, the way a lost spelunker feels like there never was such a thing as sunlight, that it was just a cruel fiction. They chased one another around in circles, panting and rolling and acting like idiots.
It was funny. With my stupid little miniature fox brain, the way I could automatically recognize everybody as foxes. That was Elliot with the snaggle teeth. That plump blue-white critter was Josh. That small, silky specimen with the wide eyes was Alice.
Somewhere in the goofing of FA game spontaneously evolved. It had something to do with pushing around a chunk of ice with your paws and your nose as fast as possible. Beyond that, the point of the game wasn't really clear, but they frantically pounced on the chunk of ice, or pounced on whoever had pounced on it just before them, and pushed it until the next person pounced on them. An Arctic fox's eyes weren't all that much to brag about, but its nose was unbelievable. Quentin's new nose was a goddamn sensory masterpiece. Even in the middle of the fray, he could recognize classmates by snuffing their fur. Increasingly, Quentin noticed one scent more than the others. It was a sharp, acrid, skunky musk that probably would have smelled like cat piss to a human being. But to a fox, it was like a drug. He caught flashes of it in the fray every few minutes, and every time he did it grabbed his attention and jerked him around like a fish on a hook. Something was happening to the game. It was losing its cohesion. Quentin was still playing, but fewer and fewer of his fellow foxes were playing with him. Elliot lit out in a streak of into the snow dunes. The pack dwindled to 10, then 8.
Worried where were they going? And what the hell was that unbe-fucking-leavable smell I kept stumbling on? There it was again. This time I tackled the source of the smell, buried my snuff-fling muzzle in her fur. Because of course I had known all along, with what was left of my consciousness, that what I was smelling was Alice.
It was totally against the rules, but breaking the rules turned out to be as much fun as obeying them.
How had I never figured that out before? The others were playing more and more wildly, they weren't even trying to go after the chunk of ice anymore, and the game was disintegrating into little knots of tussling foxes, and I was tussling with Alice. Vulpine hormones and instincts were powering up, taking over, manhandling what was left of my rational human mind.
He locked his teeth in the thick fur of her neck. It didn't seem to hurt her any, or at least not in a way that was easily distinguishable from pleasure. Something crazy and urgent was going on, and there was no way to stop it. Or probably there was, but why would you? Stopping was one of those pointless, life-defeating human impulses for which his merry little fox brain had nothing but contempt. He caught a glimpse of Alice's wild, dark fox's eye rolling with terror and then half shutting with pleasure. Their tiny, quick breaths puff-fed white in the air and mingled and disappeared. Her white fox fur was coarse and smooth at the same time, and she made little, yipping snarls every time he pushed himself deeper inside her. He never wanted to stop. The snow burned underneath them. It glowed hot like a bed of coals. They were on fire, and they let the fire consume them. Worried at an outside observer, breakfast the next day wouldn't have looked much different than it usually did. Everybody fled in their loose-fitting all-white Brakebills South uniforms, sat down without speaking or looking at one another, and ate what was put in front of them. But Quentin felt like he was walking on the moon. Giant slow-motion steps, ringing silence, vacuum all around him, a television audience of millions. He didn't dare look at anybody else, least of all Alice, worried she was sitting across the table and 3 people down from him, impassive and unperturbed, calmly focused on her oatmeal. He couldn't have guessed within a light year what she was thinking, though he knew what was on everybody else's minds. He was sure they all knew what had happened. They'd been right out in the open, for God's sake. Or had they all been doing the same thing? Did everybody pair of F? His face felt hot. He didn't even know if she was a virgin, or if she had been, whether she still was one.
Thoughtful it would all be so much simpler if I even understood what it meant, but I don't. Could I be in love with Alice? I tried to compare what I felt for her with my remembered feelings for Julia, but the two emotions were worlds apart. Things just got out of control, that's all. It wasn't us, it was their fox bodies. Nobody had to take it too seriously.
Mayakovsky sat at the head of the table looking smug.
He had known this was going to happen, stabbing at my cheese grits with a fork. A bunch of teenagers cooped up in the Fortress of Solitude for 2 months, then stuck in the bodies of stupid horny animals. Of course we were going to go crazy.
Whatever perverted personal satisfaction Mayakovsky got out of what happened, it became obvious over the next week that it was also a practical piece of personnel management, because Quentin reapplied himself to his magical studies with the laser-like focus of a person desperate to avoid meeting anybody else's eyes or thinking about things that actually mattered, like how he really felt about Alice, and who it was who had had sex with her out on the ice, him or the fox. It was back to the grind, pounding his way through circumstances and exceptions and 1,000 mnemonics designed to force him to embed 1,000 trivial particles of data in the soft tissue of his already supersaturated mind. They fell into a collective tribal trance. The depleted palate of the Antarctic world hypnotized them. The shifting snows outside briefly revealed a low ridge of dark shale, the only topographical feature in a featureless world, and the students watched it from the roof like television. It reminded him of the desert and the W and Dune Dash God. He hadn't thought about Fillory for ages. Quentin wondered if the rest of the world, his life before this, had just been a lurid dream. When he pictured the globe now, it was entirely Antarctic, a whole world over which this monochromatic continent had metastasized like an icy cancer. He went a little insane. They all did, though it took them in different ways. Some of the others became obsessed with sex. Their higher functions were so numb and exhausted they became animals, desperate for any kind of contact that wouldn't ask words of them. Impromptu orgies were not unheard of. Quentin came upon them once or twice in the evenings. They would gather in apparently arbitrary combinations, in an empty classroom or in somebody's bedroom, in semi-anonymous chains, their white uniforms half or all the way of F, their eyes glassy and bored as they pulled and stroked and pumped, always in silence. He saw Janet take part once. The display was as much for other people as for themselves, but Quentin never joined in or even watched, just turned away, feeling superior and also strangely angry. Maybe he was just angry that something kept him from jumping in. He was disproportionately relieved that he never saw Alice there. Time passed, or at least Quentin knew that according to theory. It pretty much had to be passing, though he didn't personally see much evidence of it, unless you counted the weird menagerie of mustaches and beards he and his male classmates were growing. However much he ate, he got thinner and thinner. His state of mind evolved from mesmerized to hallucinatory. Tiny, random things became charged with overwhelming significance. A round pebble, a stray straw from a broom, a dark mark on a white wall, that dissipated again minutes later. In the classroom, he sometimes saw fantastical creatures mixed in with his classmates, a huge, elegant brown stick insect that clung to the back of a chair, a giant lizard with horny skin and a German accent, whose head burned with white fire, though afterward he could never be sure if he had imagined them. He couldn't take this much longer. Then, just like that, one morning over breakfast, Mayakovsky announced that there were 2 weeks remaining in the semester, and it was time they gave serious thought to the final exam. The test was simply this: they would walk from Brakebills South to the South Pole. The distance was on the order of 500 miles. They would be given no food and no maps and no clothing. They would have to protect and sustain themselves by magic. Flying was out of bounds. They would go on foot or not at all, and in the form of human beings, not as bears or penguins or some other naturally cold-resistant animal. Cooperation between students was prohibited. They could view it as a race if they liked. There was no time limit. The exam was not mandatory. Weeks wasn't quite long enough to prepare properly, but it was more than long enough for the decision to hang over them. Wheeze or no, in or out, Mayakovsky stressed that safety precautions would be minimal. He would do his best to keep track of them in the field, but there was no guarantee that if they screwed up, he'd be able to rescue their sorry hypothermic asses. There was a lot to study up on. Would sunburn be a problem? Snow blindness? Should they toughen the soles of their feet or try to create some kind of magical footwear? As there any way to get mutton fat, which they could need to cast Chartishvili's enveloping W-arm from the kitchen, and if the test wasn't even mandatory, then what was the point of it? What would happen if they failed? It sounded more like a ritual or a hazing than a final exam. On the last morning, Quentin got up early with the idea of foraging for contraband spell components in the kitchen. He had made up his mind to compete. He had to know if he could do it or not. It was that simple. Most of the cupboards were locked. He probably wasn't the first student to have thought of it, but he did manage to load up his pockets with flour and a stray silver fork and some old sprouting garlic cloves that might come in handy for something. He didn't know what. He headed downstairs. Alice was waiting for him on the landing between floors.
I have to ask you something. Are you in love with me? It's okay if you aren't, I just want to know.
Neutral, she made it almost all the way through, but she couldn't quite say the last phrase full voice and whispered it instead. He hadn't even met her eyes since the afternoon they'd been foxes together. 3 weeks at least. Now they stood together on the smooth, freezing stone floor, abjectly human. How could a person who hadn't washed or cut her hair in 5 months be so beautiful?
Worried, I don't know. My voice was scratchy from lack of use. The words felt more frightening than any spell I had ever cast. I mean, you'd think I would, but I don't. I really don't know. Worried, I tried to make my tone light and conversational, but my body felt heavy. The floor was accelerating rapidly upward with both of us on it. At that moment, when I should have been most lucidly present, I had no idea whether I was lying or telling the truth. With all the time I'd spent studying here, everything I'd learned. Why hadn't I learned this one thing? I was failing both of them, myself and Alice.
It's okay. I didn't think so. I was more wondering whether you would lie about it.
But worried W, as I supposed to lie?
It's okay, Quentin. It was nice. The sex, IL. Do realize it's all right to have nice things sometimes, right?
She saved him from having to answer by standing up on tiptoe and kissing him softly on the lips. Her lips were dry and chapped, but the tip of her tongue was soft and warm. It felt like the last warm thing in the world.
To not to die.
She patted his rough cheek and disappeared down the stairs ahead of him in the pre-dawn twilight. After that ordeal, the test was almost an afterthought. They were released separately out onto the snowpack, at intervals, to discourage collaboration. Mayakovsky made Quentin disrobe first, so much for the flour and the garlic and that bent silver fork, and walk naked out beyond the range of the protective spells that kept the temperature bearable at Brakebills south. As he passed through the invisible perimeter, the cold hit him face first, and it was beyond all belief. Quentin's whole body spasmed and contracted. It felt like he'd been dropped into burning kerosene. The air seared his lungs. He bent over, hands jammed in his armpits. He tossed Quentin a Ziploc bag full of something gray and greasy. Mutton fat. Whatever. Quentin knew he had only a few seconds before his fingers would be too numb for spellcasting. He tore open the bag and jammed his hands inside and stuttered out Shakartashvili's enveloping W-arm. It got easier after that. He layered on the rest of the spells by turns. Protection from the wind and the sun, speed, strong legs, toughened feet. He threw up a navigation spell, and a great luminous golden compass wheel that only he could see appeared overhead in the white sky.
I knew the theory behind the spells, but I'd never tested them all together at full strength. I felt like a superhero. I felt bionic. I was in business.
He turned to face the S on the compass wheel and trotted of F toward the horizon at speed, circling around the building he'd just left, bare feet fluffing silently through bone-dry powder. With the strength spells in place, his thighs felt like pneumatic pistons. His calves were steel truck springs. His feet were as tough and numb as Kevlar brake shoes. Afterward, he remembered almost nothing of the week that followed. The whole thing was very clinical, reduced to its technical essence. It was a problem of resource management, of nurturing and guarding and fanning the little flickering flame of life and consciousness within his body as the entire continent of Antarctica tried to leach away the heat and sugar and water that kept it burning. He slept lightly and very little. His urine turned a deep amber, then ceased to flow entirely. The monotony of the scenery was relentless. Each low, crunchy ridge he topped revealed a vista composed of its identical clones arranged in a pattern of infinite regress. His thoughts went around in circles. He lost track of time. He sang the Oscar Mayer jingle and the Simpsons theme song. He talked to James and Julia. Sometimes he confused James with Martin Chatwin and Julia with Jane. The fat melted out of his body. His ribs grew more prominent, tried to push their way out through his skin. He had to be careful. His margin of error was not large. The spells he was using were powerful and highly durable, with a life of their own. He could die out here, and his corpse would probably keep jogging merrily along toward the pole on its own. Once or twice a day, sometimes more, a lipless blue crevasse would open beneath his feet, and he would have to trot around it or cross it with a magic-assisted leap. Once he stumbled right into one and fell 40 feet down into blue-tinted darkness. The ward and shield spells around his pale, nude body were so thick that he barely noticed. He just ground to a slow stop, jammed in between two rough ice walls, and then lifted himself back out again like the Lorax and kept on running. Thoughtful even as his physical strength faded, he leaned on the iron magical vigor that his sojourn under Professor Mayakovsky had given him. It no longer felt like a fluke when he worked magic successfully. The worlds of magical and physical reality felt equally real and present to him. He summoned simple spells into being without conscious thought. He reached for the magical force within him as naturally as he would reach for the salt on the dinner table. He had even gained the ability to extemporize a little, to guess at magical circumstances when he hadn't been drilled on them. The implications of this were stunning. Magic wasn't simply random. It had an actual shape, a fractal chaotic shape, but subconsciously his blindly groping mental fingertips had begun to parse it. He remembered a lecture Mayakovsky had given a few weeks before, which at the time he hadn't paid much attention to. Now, however, jogging forever south across the frozen, broken plains, it came back to him almost word for word.
Why?
That was what he called them, Skraelings. Apparently, it was a Viking word that meant roughly wretches.
But if you listen to me only one more time in your lives, listen to me now. Once you reach a certain level of fluency as a spellcaster, you will begin to manipulate reality freely. Not all of you, Dale. I think you in particular are unlikely to cross that Rubicon. But for some of you, spells will one day come very easily, almost automatically, with very little in the way of conscious effort. When the change comes, I ask only that you know it for what it is and be aware. For the true magician, there is no very clear line between what lies inside the mind and what lies outside it. If you desire something, it will become substance. If you despise it, you will see it destroyed. A master magician is not much different from a child or a madman in that respect. It takes a very clear head and a very strong will to operate once you are in that place. And you will find out very quickly whether or not you have that clarity and that strength.
Mayakovsky stared out at their silent faces a moment longer, with undisguised disgust, then stepped down from the lectern.
Age. It's wasted on the young, just like youth.
When night finally fell, the stars burned shrilly overhead with impossible force and beauty. Quentin jogged with his head up, knees high, no longer feeling anything below his waist, gloriously isolated, lost in the spectacle. He became nothing. A running wraith, a wisp of warm flesh in a silent universe of midnight frost. Once, for a few minutes, the darkness was disturbed by a flickering on the horizon. He realized it must be another student, another Skraeling like himself, moving on a parallel path but way off to the east, 20 or 30 miles at least, and ahead of him. He thought about changing course to make contact. But seriously, what was the point? Should he risk getting busted for collaborating just to say hi? What did a wraith, a wisp of warm flesh, need with anybody else? Whoever it was, he thought dispassionately, was using a different set of spells than he was. He couldn't piece out the magic at this distance, but they were throwing of a whole lot of pale pink-white light.
Inelegant? Inelegant?
When the sun rose, he lost sight of the other student again. Some immeasurable period of time later, Quentin blinked. He had lost the habit of closing his magically weatherproofed eyes, but something was bothering him. It was a matter for concern, though he could barely formulate why in any conscious, coherent way. There was a black spot in his vision. The landscape had, if anything, gotten more monotonous. Far behind him were the moments when streaks of dark frozen schist occasionally marred the white snow. Once he passed what he was fairly sure was a fallen meteorite stuck in the ice, a lump of something black, like a lost charcoal briquette, but that was a long time ago. Worried he was far gone. After days without real sleep, his mind was a machine for monitoring spells and moving his feet, nothing else. But while he was checking FF anomalies, there was something screwy going on with his compass wheel, too. It wobbled erratically, and it was getting kind of distorted. The N had grown vast and swollen. It was taking up 5/6 of the circle, and the other directions had withered away to almost nothing. The S he was supposed to be following had shrunk to a tiny squiggle in microscopic jewel type. The black spot was taller than it was wide, and it bobbed up and down with his stride the way an external object would. So it wasn't corneal damage. And it was growing larger and larger, too. It was Mayakovsky, standing by himself in the powdery nothingness, holding a blanket. He must be at the pole. Quentin had completely forgotten where he was going or why. When he got close enough, Mayakovsky caught him. The tall man grunted, wrapping the heavy, scratchy blanket around him and swung him down to the snow. Quentin's legs kept moving for a few seconds, then he lay still, panting, on his side, twitching like a netted fish. It was the first time in 9 days that he'd stopped running. The sky spun. He retched. Mayakovsky stood over him.
Molodets, Quentin, good man. Good man. You made it. With it. You are going home.
There was something odd in Mayakovsky's voice. The sneer was gone, and it was thick with emotion. A twisted smile revealed for a moment the older wizard's yellow teeth and his unshaven face. He hauled Quentin to his feet with one hand. The other hand he flourished, and a portal appeared in the air. He shoved Quentin unceremoniously through it. Quentin staggered and fell into a psychedelic riot of green that assaulted him so violently that at first he didn't recognize it as the rear terrace of Brakebills on a hot summer day. After the blankness of the polar ice, the campus was a hallucinatory swirl of sound and color and warmth. He squeezed his eyes tight shut. He was home. He rolled over on his back on the baking smooth stone. Birds sang deafeningly. He opened his eyes. A sight even stranger than the trees and the grass met them. Looking back through the portal, he could still see the tall, soft-shouldered magician standing there with Antarctic in the background. Snow kicked up around him. A few stray crystals drifted through and evaporated in mid-flight. It looked like a painting executed on an oval panel and hung in midair, but the magical window was already closing. He must be preparing himself to go back to his empty polar mansion, Quentin thought. He waved, but Mayakovsky wasn't looking at him. He was looking out at the maze and the rest of the Brakebills campus. The unguarded longing on his face was so excruciating, Quentin had to look away. Then the portal closed. It was over. It was late May, and the air was full of pollen. After the rarefied atmosphere of Antarctica, it tasted hot and thick as soup. It was a lot like that first day he'd come to Brakebills, straight through from that frigid Brooklyn afternoon. The sun beat down, he sneezed. They were all waiting for him, or almost all. Elliot and Josh and Janet, at least, wearing their old school uniforms, looking fat and happy and relaxed and none the worse for wear, like they'd done nothing for the past 6 months but sit on their asses and eat grilled cheese sandwiches.
Welcome back. They only told us 10 minutes ago you might be coming through.
W.O. Man, you look skinny. Wizard needs food badly, and also maybe a shower.
Quentin knew he had only a minute or two before he burst into tears and passed out. He still had Mayakovsky's scratchy wool blanket wrapped around him. He looked down at his pale, frozen feet. Nothing looked frostbitten anyway, though one of his toes was sticking out at an angle. It didn't hurt yet. It was very, very comfortable, deliriously comfortable, lying on his back on the hot stone like this, with the others looking down at him. He knew he should probably get up for the sake of politeness if for no other reason, but he didn't feel like moving yet. He thought he might just stay where he was for another minute. He had earned himself a rest.
Ah. Worried, Are you all right? What was it like?
Neutral, Alice kicked your ass. She got back 2 days ago. She already went home.
How worried I were out there a week and a half. W were worried about you.
Why did they keep talking? If he could just gaze up at them in silence, that would be perfect. Just look at them and listen to the chirping birds and feel the warm flagstones holding him up. And maybe somebody could get him a glass of water. He was desperately thirsty. He tried to articulate this last sentiment, but his throat was dry and cracked. He wound up just making a tiny creaking noise.
Oh, I think he wants to know about us. Yeah, nobody else went out but you two. What you think we're stupid?
ALIC. Quentin didn't spend any time in Brooklyn that summer because his parents didn't live there anymore. Abruptly and without consulting him, they'd sold of their Park Slope townhouse for a colossal sum and semi-tire to a faux colonial McMansion in a placid suburb of Boston called Chesterton, where Quentin's mother could paint full-time and his father could do God only knew what. The shock of being severed from the place he grew up in was all the more surprising because it never really came. Quentin looked for the part of him that should have missed his old neighborhood, but it wasn't there. He supposed he must have been shedding his old identity in his old life all along without noticing it. This just made the cut cleaner and neater. Really, it was probably easier this way. Not that his parents had made the move out of kindness, or any logic other than the obvious financial one. The Chesterton house was yellow with green shutters and sat on an acre so aggressively landscaped that it looked like a virtual representation of itself. Though it was trimmed and detailed in a vaguely colonial style, it was so enormous, bulging in all directions, with extra wings and gables and roofs, that it looked like it had been inflated rather than constructed. Huge cement air-conditioning bunkers hummed outside night and day. It was even more unreal than the real world usually was. When Quentin arrived home for summer vacation Brakebills summer, September for the rest of the world, his parents were alarmed at his gaunt appearance, his hollow, shell-shocked eyes, his haunted demeanor. But their curiosity about him was, as always, mild enough to be easily manageable, and he started gaining weight back quickly with the help of their massive, ever-full suburban refrigerator. At first, it was a relief just to be warm all the time and to sleep in every day, and to be free of Mayakovsky and the circumstances in that merciless white winter light. But after 72 hours, Quentin was already bored again. In Antarctica, he'd fantasized about having nothing to do except lie on his bed and sleep and stare into space. But now those empty hours were here, and they were getting old amazingly fast. The long silences at Brakebills South had made him impatient with small talk. He had no interest in TV anymore. It looked like an electronic puppet show to him, an artificial version of an imitation world that meant nothing to him anyway. Real life, or was it fantasy life? Whichever one Brakebills was, that was what mattered, and that was happening somewhere else. As he usually did when he was stuck at home, he went on a fillery binge. The old 1970s-era covers looked more and more dated every time he saw them, with their psychedelic YLO submarine palette, and on a couple of them, the covers had come off completely and been tucked back between the pages as bookmarks. But the world inside the books was as fresh and vital as ever, unfaded and unironized by time. Quentin had never before really appreciated the cleverness of the second book, The Girl in Old Tea Time, in which Rupert and Helen are abruptly shanghaied into Fillory straight out of their respective boarding schools, the only time the Chatwins cross over in winter instead of summer. They end up back in an earlier time period, one that overlaps with the storyline of the first book. With the aid of foreknowledge, Rupert dogs Martin's and Helen's footsteps. The earlier Helens as they repeat the action of the Spirils in the W-ord and the W-alls. Note for note, he keeps just out of view, dropping clues and helping them out without their knowledge. The mysterious character known only as the Good One turns out to have been Rupert in disguise. Quentin wondered if Plover wrote The Girl Who Old Tea Time just to shore up all the plot holes in the W-world and the W-alls. Meanwhile, Helen embarks on a hunt for the mysterious questing beast of Fillory, which according to legend can't be caught, but if you do catch it, dash all logic aside, it's supposed to give you your heart's desire. The beast leads her on a tricksy, circuitous chase that somehow winds in and out of the enchanted tapestries that adorn the library of Castle Whitespire. She only ever catches a glimpse of it, peeking coyly out at her from behind an embroidered shrub before vanishing in a flicker of cloven hoofs. At the end, the twin rams Ember and Umber show up as usual. Like a pair of sinister ruminant constables. They were a force for good, of course. But there was a slightly Orwellian quality to their oversight of Fillory. They knew everything that went on, and there was no obvious limit to their powers. But they rarely bestirred themselves to actively intervene on behalf of the creatures in their char. Mostly they just scolded everybody involved for the mess they'd made. Finishing each other's sentences then made everyone renew their vows of fealty before wandering away to crop some luckless farmer's alfalfa fields. They firmly usher Rupert and Helen back into the real world, back into the damp, chilly, dark wood-paneled halls of their boarding schools as if they had never left it. What's thoughtful, Quentin even plowed through the W. Dune, the fifth and last book in the series, that is the last as far as anybody but Quentin knew, and not a fan favorite. It was longer by half than any of the other books and starred Helen and the youngest Chatwin, clever, introverted Jane. The tone of the W. Dune is different from earlier books. Having spent the last 2 volumes searching fruitlessly for their vanished brother Martin, the Chatwin's usual cheery English indomitability has been tempered by a wistful mood. On entering Fillory, the 2 girls encounter a mysterious sand dune being blown through the kingdom, all by itself. They climb the dune and find themselves riding it through the green Fillorian countryside and on out into a dreamy desert wasteland in the far south, where they spend most of the rest of the book. Almost nothing happens. Jane and Helen fill up the pages with interminable conversations about right and wrong and teenage Christian metaphysics and whether their true obligations lie on Earth or in Fillory. Jane is desperately worried about Martin, but also, like Quentin, a little jealous. Whatever iron law kept the Chatwins from staying in Fillory forever, he had found a loophole, or it had found him in. Alive or dead, he had managed to overstay his tourist visa. But Helen, who has a scoldy streak, heaps scorn on Martin. She thinks he's just hiding in Fillory, so he won't have to go home. He's the child who doesn't want to leave the playground or who won't go to bed. He's Peter Pan. Why can he grow up and face the real world? She calls him selfish, self-indulgent, the biggest baby of us all. In the end, the sisters are picked up by a majestic clipper ship that sails through the sand as if it were water. The ship is crewed by large bunnies, who would be overly cutesy. The Dune haters always compared them to Ewoks, if it weren't it for their impressively hard-assed attention to the technical details of operating their complex vessel. The bunnies leave Jane and Helen with a gift, a set of magical buttons they can use to zap themselves from Earth to Fillory and back at will. On returning to England, Helen, in a fit of self-righteousness, promptly hides the buttons and won't tell Jane where they are, upon which Jane excoriates her in fine period vernacular and turns the entire household upside down and inside out. But she never finds the buttons, and on that unsatisfying note the book, and the whole series, ends. Even if it didn't turn out to be the final book in the series, Quentin wondered where Plover could possibly have gone with the story in The Magicians. For one thing, he was out of Chatwins. The books always featured 2 Chatwin children, an older one from the previous book and a new younger one. But pretty, dark-haired Jane was the last and youngest Chatwin. W wouldn't back to Fillory alone. It broke the pattern. For another, half of the fun of the books was waiting for the Chatwins to find their way into Fillory, for the magic door that opens for them, and them only to appear. You always knew it would, and it always surprised you when it did. But with the buttons you could shuttle back and forth at will. Where was the miracle in that? Maybe that was why Helen hid them. They might as well have built a subway to Fillory. Quentin's conversations with his parents were so circular and self-defeating, they sounded like experimental theater. In the mornings, he lay in bed as long as he could stand it in an attempt to avoid breakfast with them, but they always waited him out. He couldn't win. They had even less to do than he did. Sometimes he wondered if it was a perverse game they played, that they were in on and he wasn't. He would come down to find them sitting at a table littered with crusts and crumbs and clementine peels and cereal bowls. While he pretended to be interested in the Chesterton chestnut, he would furiously search for some even remotely plausible topic of conversation.
So, are you guys still going on that trip to South America?
South America?
A look passed between Quentin's parents.
Neutral! Spo!
Oh, Portugal. Right. I was thinking Peru for some reason.
Neutral, Spain and Portugal. It's for your mother. There's an artist's exchange with the University in Lisbon. Then we're going to take a boat trip down the Tigris.
Tigris, darling, the Tigris. The Tigris is in Iraq.
She bit into a piece of raisin toast with her large, straight teeth.
WL, I don't think we'll be sailing down the Tigris anytime soon. Darling, do you remember that week we spent in a houseboat on the V. Olga?
An extended Russian reminiscence followed, a duet punctuated by significant silences that Quentin interpreted as allusions to sexual activities that he didn't want to know about. It was enough to make you envy the Chatwins with Dad in the army and Mum in the madhouse. Mayakovsky would have known what to do with this kind of conversation. He would have silenced it. He wondered how hard that spell was to learn. By about 11 every morning, Quentin would hit his limit and flee the house for the relative safety of Chesterton, which stubbornly refused to reveal even the slightest hint of mystery or intrigue beneath its green, self-satisfied exterior. He had never learned to drive, so he rode his father's white 1970s-era 10-speed, which weighed approximately 1 metric ton to the center of town. Out of deference to its glorious colonial heritage, the town was governed by a set of draconian zoning laws that kept everything in a state of permanent, unnatural quaintness. Knowing no one, caring about nothing, Quentin took a tour of the low-ceilinged, heavy-timbered residence of some revolutionary luminary. He inspected a boxy, white-painted Unitarian churchest. 1766. He surveyed the lush, flat lawns where amateur Continental irregulars had faced off against well-drilled, well-armed redcoats, with predictable results. There was one pleasant surprise hidden behind the church, a lovely half-vanished 17th-century graveyard. A little square glebe of ultra-green grass scattered with wet saffron-colored elm leaves, with a bent wrought iron fence around it. Inside it was cool and hushed. The gravestones were all winged skulls and bad devotional quatrains about whole families carried of ved by fever, weathered in places into illegibility. Quentin crouched down on the wet grass to try to decipher one very old one, a rectangle of blue slate that had split in half and sunk halfway into the green turf, which rose up to meet it like a wave.
Quentin.
He straightened up. A woman about his age had come in through the cemetery gate.
Worried, how did she know my name?
I guess you didn't think I would find you. I guess you didn't think of that.
She walked right up to him. At the last possible moment, too late to do anything about it, he realized that she wasn't going to stop. Without breaking stride, she grabbed the front of his barn jacket and marched him stumbling backward over a low footstone right into the aromatic branches of a cypress tree. Her face pushed right up in front of his, dangerously close, was an angry mask. It had been raining of effing on all afternoon, and the needles were damp. He resisted the impulse to struggle. He wasn't going to be caught fighting a girl in a churchyard.
Whoa, whoa, whoa! Stop. Just stop.
Now I'm here, and we are going to talk. You are going to deal with me.
Now that he had a closer look at her, he could see he was covered in warning signs. Her whole body screamed unbalance. She was too pale and too thin. Her eyes were too wild. Her long dark hair was lank and smelled unwashed. She was dressed in a raggedy goth outfit. Her arms were wrapped in what looked like black electrical tape. There were scabby red scratches on the backs of her hands. He almost didn't recognize her.
I was there, and you were there. Errand to you, in that place. That school, or whatever it was. You got in, didn't you?
He got it then. She had been at the exam after all. He hadn't been mistaken. But she hadn't made the cut. They'd culled her in the first round, during the written test. But this was all wrong. It wasn't supposed to happen. There were safeguards against it. Anybody who flunked the exam was supposed to have their memory gently, lovingly clouded by a faculty member and then overwritten with a plausible alibi. It wasn't simple, nor was it outrageously ethical. But the spells were humane and well understood, except in her case they hadn't worked, or not completely.
Worried Julia. Their faces were very close together. There was nicotine on her breath. Julia, what are you doing here?
Don't pretend with me. Don't you, Dari, pretend. You go to that school. Don't you? The magic school?
Quentin kept his face blank. It was a basic rule at Brakebills not to discuss the school with outsiders. He could get expelled. But whatever. If Fogg screwed up the memory spells, it wasn't Quentin's problem. And this was Julia. Her lovely freckly face, so close to his, looked much older. Her skin was blotchy. She was in agony.
All right. Okay, sure. I go there.
I knew it. I knew it was real. I knew it was real. I knew it wasn't a dream.
She bent over with her hands over her face and one convulsive sob escaped her. Quentin took a deep breath. He readjusted his jacket.
Listen, Julia. You're not supposed to remember any of that stuff, F. They're supposed to make you forget if you don't get in.
But I should have. I was supposed to get in. I know I was. It was a mistake. Believe me, it was. I'm like you. I can do real magic. I'm like you. See? That's why they couldn't make me forget.
Quentin saw he could see everything. No wonder she'd been so altered the last time he saw her. That one glimpse through the curtain of the world behind the world had knocked her completely out of orbit. She'd seen it once, and she couldn't let go. Brakebills had ruined her.
There was a time when I would have done anything for her. And I still would, I just didn't know what to do. Why did I feel so guilty? But that's not how it works. Even if you really can do magic, that wouldn't make you any more resistant to memory spells than anybody else.
Worried, she was staring at him hungrily. Everything he was saying just confirmed what she wanted to believe. That magic was real. He backed away just to put some distance between them, but she grabbed his sleeve.
Oh, no, 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 no. Q, please. W, wait. No. Why you're going to help me? That's why I came here.
She had dyed her hair black. It looked dry and burnt.
Julia, I want to. I just don't know what I can do.
Just watch this. W, watch.
She let go of his arm reluctantly, as if she expected him to vanish or run away the instant she did. Incredibly, Julia launched into a basically correct version of a simple Basque optical spell called Ugarde's Prismatic Spray. She must have found it online. Some genuine magical information did circulate in the straight world, mostly on the internet, though it was buried in so much bogus crap that nobody could tease out the real stuff even if they could have used it. Quentin had even seen a Brakebills blazer for sale on eBay. It was extremely rare, but not unheard of, for civilians to work up a spell or two on their own. But as far as Quentin knew, they never got into anything serious. Real magicians called them hedge witches. A few of them had careers as stage magicians, or set themselves up as cult demi-deities, gathering around themselves congregations of YC-cans and Satanists, and oddball Christian outliers. Julia proclaimed the words of the spell theatrically, over-articulating like she was doing Summer Dash stock Shakespeare. She had no idea what she was doing. Quentin glanced nervously at the doorway at the back of the church.
Look!
She held up her hand defiantly. The spell had actually worked, sort of. Her bitten-down fingertips left faint, radiant rainbow trails in the air. She waved them around, making mystical gestures like an interpretive dancer. Ugarda's Prismatic Spray was a totally useless spell. Quentin felt a pang when he thought about how many months, if not years, it must have cost her to figure it out.
See? You'll see it too, right? It's not too late for me. I won't go back to college. TL them, I could still come. He wouldn't understand. I don't see him anymore.
He wanted to help her, but there was no way to. It was far, far too late. Better to be blunt about it.
This could have been me. This was almost me. I don't think there's anything I can do. It's not up to me. I've never heard of them changing their minds. No one ever gets a second exam. Thoughtful, but Alice got an exam, even though she wasn't invited.
You all could tell them, though. You can tell them I'm here, right? That I'm still out here? I am still out here?
She grabbed his arm again, and he had to mutter a quick counterspell to snuff out the prismatic spray. That stuff could eat into fabric.
Just tell them you saw me, please. I've been practicing. You can teach me. I'll be your apprentice. I'll do whatever you need. I have an aunt who lives in Winchester. I can live with her. Or what do you need, Quentin? Maybe we can help each other. Yell used to want my help.
He was angry at himself for being tempted. He was angry at the world for being this way. He wanted to yell obscenities. It would have been terrible to see anybody scrape the bottom like this but her. It should have been anybody but her.
She has already seen more unhappiness than I will ever see in my life. Listen to me, Julia. If I tell them, they're just going to find you and wipe your memory. For real this time.
They can try. They tried once already.
She breathed hard through pinched white nostrils.
Just tell me where it is. Where we were. I've been looking for it. Just tell me where the school is and I'll leave you alone.
Worried Quentin could only imagine the kind of shit he'd be in if Julia showed up at the house hell-bent on matriculating and dropped his name.
Worried it's in upstate Newark, on the Hudson somewhere. I don't know exactly where. I really don't. It's near West Point. They make it invisible. Even I don't know how to find it. But I'll tell them about you if that's truly what you want. Worried I was just making it worse. Maybe I should have bluff-fed her after all. TRI's title lie. TRI, late.
She put her arms around him, as if she were too exhausted by relief and despair to stand anymore, and he held her. There was a time when this was everything he wanted.
They couldn't make me forget. Do you understand that? They couldn't make me forget.
He could feel her heart beating, and the word he heard when it beat was shame, shame, shame. He wondered why they hadn't taken her. If anybody should have gone to Brakebills, it was her, not him. But they really would wipe her memory, he thought. Fogg would make sure this time she'd be happier that way anyway. She could get back on track, go back to college, get back together with James, get on with her life. It would all be for the best. By next morning, he was back at Brakebills. The others were already there. They were surprised he lasted as long as he did. The most any of them had spent at home was 48 hours. Elliot hadn't gone home at all. It was cool and quiet in the cottage. Quentin felt safe again. He was back where he belonged. Elliot was in the kitchen with a dozen eggs and a bottle of brandy trying to make flips, which nobody wanted but which he was determined to make anyway. Josh and Janet were playing an idiotic card game called Push, was basically the magical equivalent of WR that was wildly popular at Brakebills. Quentin just used it as a chance to show off his card handling skills, which was why nobody ever wanted to play with him anymore. While they played, Janet told the story of Alice's Antarctic ordeal, despite the fact that everybody except Quentin had heard it already and Alice herself was right there in the room, silently paging through an old herbal in the window seat. Quentin didn't know how he would feel about seeing Alice again after he'd made such a comprehensive mess of their last conversation, but to his amazed relief, and despite every possible reason to the contrary, it wasn't awkward at all. It was perfect. His heart clenched with silent happiness when he saw her.
And then when Mayakovsky tried to give her the bag of sheep fat, she threw it back in his face.
I meant to hand it back to him, but it was so cold, and I was shaking so badly I sort of flung it at him. He was all short, Vosmy.
Neutral, why didn't you just take it?
I don't know. I'd made all these plans for getting by without it. It just threw me a faff, plus I wanted him to stop looking at me naked. And anyway, I didn't know he was going to have mutton fat for us. I hadn't even prepared the Chakhtishvili.
That was a white lie. Like Alice couldn't have cast Chakhtishvili cold. He had missed her so much.
So what did you do for heat?
I tried using some of those German thermogenesis charms, but they kept fading away whenever I fell asleep. By the second night, I was waking myself up every 15 minutes just to make sure I was still alive. By the third day, I was losing my mind, so I ended up using a tweaked Miller Flare.
I don't get it. How is that supposed to help?
If you kind of mangle it a little, it becomes inefficient. The extra energy comes out as heat instead of light.
Worried, why, oh no, you could have cooked yourself by accident.
I know, but when I realized the German thing wasn't going to work, I couldn't think of anything else.
I think I saw you once, at night.
You couldn't have missed me. I look like a road flare.
A naked road flare.
Elliot came in with a tureen full of viscous, unappetizing flip and began ladling it into teacups. Alice picked up her book and headed for the stairs.
Hang on, I'm coming back with the hot ones.
Quentin didn't hang on. He followed Alice. At first he thought everything would be different between him and Alice. Then he thought everything was back to normal. Now he understood that he didn't want things to be back to normal. He couldn't stop looking at her even after she'd looked at him, seen him looking at her, and looked away in embarrassment again. It was like she'd become Shargate in some way that drew him to her uncontrollably. He could sense her naked body inside her dress, smell it like a vampire smells blood. Maybe Mayakovsky hadn't quite managed to get all the fox out of him. He found her in one of the upstairs bedrooms. She was lying on one of the pair of twin beds, on top of the bedspread reading. It was dim and hot. The roof slanted in at an odd angle. The room was full of odd, old furniture. A wicker chair with a staved-in seat, a dresser with a stuck drawer, and it had deep red wallpaper that didn't match any other room in the house. Quentin yanked up the window halfway, It made an outraged squawk and flopped down on the other twin bed.
Can you believe they have these here? It's a full set. They were in the bookcase in the bathroom.
She held up the book she was reading. Incredibly, it was an old copy of the W World and the W Alls.
I had that exact same edition.
The cover showed Martin Chatwin halfway through the old grandfather clock, with his feet still in this world and his amazed head poking into Filari, which was drawn as a groovy 1970s disco winter wonderland.
I haven't looked at them for years. God, remember the cozy horse? That big velvet horse that would just carry you around? I wanted one so badly when I was that age. Did you read them?
Quentin wasn't sure how much to reveal about his Filari obsession.
Neutral. I may have taken a look.
Why is it that you still think you can keep secrets from me?
Quentin folded his hands behind his head and lay back on the pillow and looked up at the low, tilted ceiling. This wasn't right. There was something brother-sister about it.
Here, budge over.
He switched beds and lay down next to Alice, hip-checking her sideways to make room on the narrow bed. She held up the paperback, and they read together silently for a few pages. Their shoulders and upper arms touched. Quentin felt like the bed was on a train moving very fast, and if he looked out the window, he'd see the landscape racing past. They were both breathing very carefully.
Thoughtful I never got it about the cozy horse. First of all, there's only one of it. Is there a whole herd of cozy horses somewhere? And then it's too useful. You'd think somebody would have domesticated it by now.
She whacked his head with the spine, not completely gently.
Somebody evil. Yo, can break the cozy horse. The cozy horse is a free spirit. Anyway, it's too big. I always figured it was mechanical. Somebody made it somehow.
Neutral. Like who?
I don't know. A magician. Somebody in the past. Anyway, the cozy horse is a girl thing.
Janet stuck her head in. Apparently the exodus downstairs was general.
I can believe you're reading that.
Alice scooched an inch away from him, instinctively, but he didn't move.
Now, like you didn't.
Of course I did. When I was 9, I made my family call me Fiona for 2 weeks.
She vanished, leaving behind a comfortable, echoless silence. The room was cooling down as hot air ascended out through the half-open window. Quentin imagined it rising in an invisible braided plume into the blue summer day.
Did you know there really was a Chatwin family? In real life? Supposedly they lived next door to Plover.
Alice nodded. She unscooched now that Janet was gone.
It's sad, though. W.L., do you know what happened to them?
Quentin shook his head.
There's a book about it. Most of them grew up to be pretty boring. Housewives and insurance magnates and whatnot. I think one of the boys married an heiress. I know one got killed in WRT Wall, but you know the thing about Martin?
Quentin shook his head.
W.L., you know how he disappears in the book. He really did disappear. He ran away, or had an accident or something. One day after breakfast he just vanished, and they never saw him again.
The real Martin.
The real Martin.
God, that is sad.
He tried to imagine it, a big fresh-faced, floppy-haired English family. He pictured them in a sepia-toned family portrait in tennis whites, suddenly with a gaping hole opening in the middle of it. The somber announcement, the slow, decorous acceptance, the lingering damage.
It makes me think of my brother.
I know.
At this, she looked at him sharply. He looked back. It was true. He did know. He propped himself up on one elbow so he could look down at her, the air around him whirling with excited dust motes.
Thoughtful when I was little, and even when I was not so little, I used to envy Martin.
We smiled up at him.
I know.
Thoughtful because I thought he'd finally done it. I know it was supposed to be a tragedy, but to me, it was like he broke the bank, beat the system. He got to stay in Filari forever.
I know, I get it. That's what makes you different from the rest of us, Quentin. You actually still believe in magic. You do realize, right, that nobody else does. I mean, we all know magic is real, but you really believe in it, don't you?
Worried he felt flustered.
Worried? Is that wrong?
She nodded and smiled even more brightly.
Y is Quentin. It's wrong.
He kissed her, softly at first. Then he got up and locked the door. And that's how it started, though. Of course, it had been starting for a long time. At first, it was like they were getting away with something, as if they half expected someone or something to stop them. When nothing happened and there were no consequences, they lost control. They ravenously, roughly pulled each other's clothes of F, not just out of desire for each other, but out of a pure desire to lose control. It was like a fantasy. The sound of breathing and rustling cloth was thunderous in the little chaste bedroom. God only knew what they could hear downstairs. He wanted to push her to see if she had it as bad as he did, to see how far she'd go and how far she'd let him go. She didn't stop him. She pushed him ever further. It wasn't his first time or even his first time with Alice technically, but this was different. This was real human sex, and it was so much better just because they weren't animals. Because they were civilized and prudish and self-conscious humans who transformed into sweaty, lustful, naked beasts, not through magic, but because that's who on some level they really were all along. They tried to be discreet about it. They barely even discussed it between themselves. But the others knew, and they came up with excuses to leave the two of them alone, and Quentin and Alice took them. Probably they were relieved that the tension between them was finally over. In its way, the fact that Alice wanted Quentin as much as he wanted her was as much of a miracle as anything else he'd seen since he came to Brakebills, and no easier to believe, though he had no choice but to believe it. His love for Julia had been a liability, a dangerous force that lashed him to cold, empty Brooklyn. Alice's love was so much more real, and it bound him finally and for good to his new life, his real life, at Brakebills. It fixed him here and nowhere else. It wasn't a fantasy. It was flesh and blood, and she understood that. She seemed to know everything about Quentin, everything he was thinking and feeling, sometimes before he did, and she wanted him in spite of it, because of it. Together, they rudely colonized the upstairs at the cottage, running back to the dorms only for indispensable personal items, and letting it be known that trespassers would be exposed to displays of mutual affection, verbal and otherwise, in the sight of their scattered underthings. That wasn't the only miraculous event that summer. Astoundingly, the three older physical kids had graduated from Brakebills. Even Josh with his lousy grades. The official ceremony would happen in another week. It was a private affair to which the rest of the school was not invited. By tradition, they would be allowed to stay at Brakebills for the rest of the summer, but after that they would be ushered out into the world. Quentin was stunned by this turn of events. They all were. It was hard to imagine life at Brakebills without them. It was hard for Quentin to imagine life after Brakebills at all. There hadn't been much discussion of what they were going to do next, or at least not around Quentin. It wasn't necessarily a cause for alarm. The passage from Brakebills to the outside world was a well-traveled one. There was an extensive network of magicians operating in the wider world, and, being magicians, they were in no danger of starving. They could do more or less whatever they wanted as long as they didn't interfere with one another. The real problem was figuring out to their own satisfaction what that was. Some of the student body went into public service quietly promoting the success of humanitarian causes, or subtly propping up the balance of various failing ecosystems, or participating in the governance of magical society such as it was. A lot of people just traveled, or created magical artworks, or staged elaborate sorceress war games. Others went into research. Many magical schools, although not Brakebills, of fared programs of postgraduate study, with various advanced degrees conferred at the end. Some students even chose to matriculate at a regular non-magical university. The application of conventional science, chemistry especially, to magical techniques was a hot field. Who knew what exotic spells you could create using the new transuranic elements?
I was thinking of trying to talk to the Thames Dragon about it.
They were sitting on the floor in the library. It was too hot for chairs. The who?
I think he would see you.
We'll never know till you ask.
W8, a minute. Who or what is the Thames Dragon?
The Thames Dragon. Why, oh no, the dragon who lives in the Thames. I'm sure he has another name. A dragon name, but I doubt we could pronounce it.
What are you saying? An actual dragon? Are you saying there are real dragons?
He hadn't quite reached the point where he always knew when he was being made fun of.
Come on, Quentin.
They'd gotten to the part of push where they flipped cards across the room into a hat. They were using a mixing bowl from the kitchen.
I'm not kidding.
Y You really don't know? Didn't you read the McCabe? It was in It was in Mech's class.
No, I did not read the McCabe. You could have just told me there were real dragons.
It never came up.
Apparently, there really were such things as dragons, though they were rare. And most of them were water dragons, solitary creatures who rarely broke the surface and spent a lot of their time asleep buried in river mud. There was one no more in each of the world's major rivers. And being smart and practically immortal, they tended to stash away all kinds of odd bits of wisdom. The Thames dragon was not as sociable as the Ganges dragon, the Mississippi dragon, or the Neva dragon, but it was said to be much smarter and more interesting. The Hudson River had a dragon of its own. It spent most of its time curled up in a deep, shadowy eddy less than a mile from the Brakebills boathouse. It hadn't been seen for almost a century. The largest and oldest known dragon was a colossal wight who lived coiled up inside a huge freshwater aquifer under the Antarctic ice cap, and who had never once in recorded history spoken to anyone, not even its own kind.
But you really think the Thames Dragon is going to give you free career advice?
Oh, I don't know. Dragons are so weird about these things. Yao want to ask them deep, profound questions, like where does magic come from? Or are there aliens? Or what are the next 10% primes? And half the time they just want to play Chinese checkers.
I love Chinese checkers.
WL, okay, maybe you should go talk to the Thames Dragon.
Maybe I will. I think we'd have a lot to talk about.
Quentin felt like all the physical kids were falling in love with each other. Not just him and Alice, or at least with who they were when they were around each other. In the mornings, they slept late. In the afternoons, they played pool and boated on the Hudson, and interpreted each other's dreams and debated meaningless points of magical technique. They discussed the varying intensities and timbres of their hangovers. There was an ongoing competition, hotly contested, as to who could make the single most boring observation. Josh was teaching himself to play the rinky-tink upright piano in the upstairs hallway, and they lay on the grass and listened to his halting rendition of Heart and Soul over and over and over again. It should have been annoying, but somehow it wasn't say. By this point, they had thoroughly co-opted the butler, Chambers, who regularly furnished them with extra special bottles from the Brakebills cellars, which were overcrowded anyway and needed to be drunk up. Elliot was the only one with any real sophistication in oenological matters, and he tried to teach the rest of them, but Quentin's tolerance was low, and he refused to spit as a matter of principle, so he just ended up getting drunk every night and forgetting whatever he was supposed to be learning and starting over from scratch the next night. Every morning when he woke up, it seemed impossible that he could ever consume another drop of alcohol. But that conviction had always evaporated by 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Neutral EENSTREET. One afternoon, all 5 of them were sitting cross-legged in a circle in the vast empty middle of the sea. It was a baking hot summer day, and they had gone out there with the intention of attempting a ridiculously elaborate piece of collaborative magic, a 5-person spell that, if it worked, would sharpen their vision and hearing and increase their physical strength for a couple of hours. It was Viking magic battlefield magic, designed for a raiding party, and as far as any of them knew, it hadn't been tried in roughly a millennium. Josh, who was directing their efforts, confessed that he wasn't completely sure it had ever worked in the first place. Those Viking shamans did a lot of her empty boasting. They had started drinking early over lunch. Even though Josh said everything was ready at noon, done deal, good to go, let's hook it up by The Magicians by Lev Grossman, cast by our Tale Studio. Please subscribe to our channel if you enjoy listening. The time he actually gave in their handouts spiral ring pages of Old Norse chants scratched out in ballpoint in Josh's neat tiny runic script, and prepared the ground by pouring out a weaving, branching knot in black sand on the grass and when the grass. It was almost 4. There was singing involved and neither Janet nor Quentin could carry a tune, and they kept cracking each other up and having to start over. Finally, they got all the way through it, and they sat around staring at the grass and the sky and the backs of their hands and the clock tower in the distance, trying to tell if anything was different. Quentin jogged to the edge of the forest to pee, and when he got back, Janet was talking about somebody named Emily Greenstreet.
Don't tell me you knew her.
I didn't. But remember, I roomed with that cow Emma Curtis during first year? I was talking to her cousin last week when I was home. She lives near my parents in LA. She was here then. Told me the whole story.
Really?
And now you're going to tell us.
It's all a big secret, though. You can't tell anybody.
Emma wasn't a cow. Or she was a hot cow. She's like one of those Wagyu cows. Did she ever pay you back for that dress she threw up on?
He was lying on his back, staring up into the cloudless sky. He didn't seem to care if the spell had worked or not.
No, she didn't. And now she's gone to Tajikistan or something to save the vanishing Asiatic grasshopper. Or something. Cow.
Who's Emily Greenstreet?
Emily Greenstreet was the first person to leave Brakebills voluntarily in 150 years.
Her words floated up and drifted away like cigarette smoke in the warm summer air. It was hot out in the middle of the sea, with no shade, that they were all too lazy to move.
She came to Brakebills about 8 years ago. I think she was from Connecticut, but not fancy Connecticut, with the money and the Kennedy cousins and the Lyme disease. I think she was from New Haven, or Bridgeport. She was quiet, sort of mousy-looking.
How do you know she was mousy-looking?
Don't antagonize her. I want to hear the story.
They were all lying on a stripy blanket spread out over the ruins of Josh's sand pattern.
I know, because Emma's cousin told me. Anyway, it's my story, and if I say she was mousy, then she had a tail, and she lived on Swiss fucking cheese. Emily Greenstreet was one of these girls that nobody ever notices, who are only friends with other girls nobody notices. Nobody likes or dislikes them. They have weak chins or chickenpox scars, or their glasses are too big. I know I'm being mean, but they're just sort of at the edge of everything. She was a good student. She kept busy and got by in her boring little way until her 3rd year, when she finally distinguished herself by falling in love with one of her professors. Everybody does it, of course. Or at least the girls do, since we all have daddy complexes. But usually it's just a crush, and we get over it and move on to some loser guy our own age. But not our Emily. She was deeply, passionately, delusionally in love. Wuthering Heights love. She stood outside his window at night. She drew little pictures of him in class. She looked at the moon and cried. She drew little pictures of the moon in class and cried at them. She became moody and depressed. She started wearing black and listening to the Smiths and reading Camus in the original whatever. Her eyes became interestingly pouchy and sunken. She started hanging out at Woof.
Woof was a fountain in the maze. Its official name was Van Pelt, after an 18th century dean, but it depicted Romulus and Remus suckling from a she-wolf with many dangling wolf boobs, hence Woof. It was the chosen hangout of the Goths and the artsy crowd.
Now she had a secret, capital S, and ironically it made her more attractive to people, because they wanted to know what her secret was. And sure enough, before long a boy, some deeply unfortunate boy, fell in love with her. She didn't love this boy back since she was saving all her lovin' for Professor Sexy Man. But he made her feel pretty damn good, since nobody had ever been in love with her before. She strung him along and flirted with him in public in the hope that it would make her real love interest jealous. Now we turn to the 3rd point in our little triangle of love. By all rights, the professor should have been completely impervious to our Emily's charms. He should have had an avuncular little chuckle over it in the senior common room and then forgotten about it. She wasn't even that hot. Maybe he was having a midlife crisis. Maybe he thought a liaison with Ms. Greenstreet could restore to him some of his long-vanished youth. Who knows? He was married too, the idiot. We'll never know exactly what happened or how far it went, except that it went too far, and then Professor Sexyman came to his senses, or got what he wanted, and he called it off. Needless to say, our Emily became even gothier and weepier and more like a gory drawing than she already was, and her boy became even more besotted and brought her presents and flowers and was supportive. Maybe you knew this, I don't know, I didn't. But Woof used to be different from the other fountains. That's why the Doomer started hanging out there in the first place. You wouldn't notice what was off about it at first, but after a while you'd realize that when you looked into it, you wouldn't see your own reflection, just empty sky. And maybe if the sky was cloudy on that particular day, the sky in the fountain would be blue, or the other way around. It definitely wasn't a normal reflection. And every once in a while you'd look into it and you'd see other faces looking up at you, looking puzzled, as if they were looking into some other fountain somewhere else and were weirded out because they were seeing your face and not their own. Somebody must have figured out a way to switch the reflections in 2 fountains, but who did it and why? And how, and why the dean didn't change them back? I have no idea. Thoughtful, you have to wonder too if it was more than just the reflections, if you could dive down into one pool and come up in the other one, in this world, or some other world. There's always been something off about those fountains. Did you know they were here before Brakebills? They built the school to be near them and not the other way around.
Elliot snorted.
Well, that's what people say, darling. Anyway, the thing is, Emily started spending a lot of time at Woof, just smoking and hanging out, and I guess mooning over her little affair. She spent so much time there that she started to recognize one of the faces in the fountain. Somebody like her who was spending a lot of time at the other fountain, the one in the reflection. Let's call her Doris. After a while, Emily and Doris got to noticing each other. They'd acknowledge each other, a little wave, just to be polite. Probably Doris was a little mopey too. They got to feeling like kindred spirits. Emily and Doris worked out a way to communicate. Again, the exact details have eluded your intrepid correspondent. Maybe they held up signs or something? They must have had to be in mirror writing to make sense as reflections, or am I getting that wrong? I don't know how things worked in Woofland where Doris lived. Maybe magic is different there? Or maybe Doris was fucking with our Emily. Maybe she was sick of hearing Emily whine about her love life. Maybe there was something really wrong with Doris. Maybe she was something genuinely evil. But one day Doris suggested that if Emily wanted her lover back, maybe her appearance was the problem, and she should try changing it.
A chill settled over the group where they lay on the sun-warmed turf.
Worried, even I knew that using magic to alter one's physical appearance never ended well. In the world of magical theory, it was a dead spot. Something about the inextricable recursive connection between your face and who you were. Your soul, for lack of a better word, made it hellishly difficult and fatally unpredictable. When I had first gotten to Brakebills, I'd wondered why everybody didn't just make themselves ridiculously good-looking. I'd looked at the kids with an obviously flawed feature like Gretchen with her leg, or Elliot with his twisted jaw, and wondered why they didn't get somebody to fix them up, like Hermione with her teeth in Harry Potter. But in reality, it always ended in disaster.
Poor Emily. When she took down the spell that Doris taught her through the fountain, she actually thought she'd found it, the secret technique everybody else had missed. It was elaborate and costly, but it really looked like it might work. After a few weeks of laying the groundwork, she put it together one night by herself in her room. How do you think she felt when she looked in the mirror and saw what she'd done to herself? I can't imagine. I really can't.
It was late enough in the afternoon now that the shadows from the forest had almost stretched out from the western edge of the sea far enough to lap at the edge of their blanket.
Must have been she could still talk, because she got word to her boy that she was in trouble, and he came to her room, and after much preliminary whispering through the keyhole she let him in, and we have to give our boy credit. It must have been bad, very bad, but he stuck by her. She wouldn't let him go to the faculty. Dunleavy was still dean, and she would have kicked Emily out without thinking about it. So he told her to stay there, don't move, don't do anything to make it worse. He would go to the library and see what he could find. He came back just before dawn, thinking he had it pretty much worked out. You can imagine the scene. They'd both been up all night. They're sitting cross-legged on her little bed, her with her scrambled head, him with about 8 books open around him on the covers. He's mixed up a few reagents in cereal bowls from the dining hall. She's leaning what's left of her forehead against the wall, trying to keep cool. The blue in the window is getting brighter and brighter. They've got to take care of this soon. She'd probably gone past panic and regret at this point, but not past hope. Thoughtful, but then think about his state of mind. In a way, for him, it was the perfect thing to have happen. This is his golden moment, his chance to be the hero, to save her and win her love, or at least some pity sex. It's his chance to be strong for her, which is the only thing he's ever wanted to do. But I don't know. I think he'd had enough time at this point. Maybe he figured out what was really going on. I'm guessing the dyne had finally dropped. She'd taken a terrible chance, and he had to know she hadn't done it for him. Either way, he was in no shape to be doing major wizardry. He was tired and scared and in over his head, and I think his heart must have been broken a little too. Maybe he just wanted it too badly. He launched into the repair spell, which I happen to know which one it was. It was from the Major Arcana Renaissance stuff. Big energies. It got away from him in the worst possible way. It took him over, took his body away. Right in front of her eyes, he burned up screaming. Blue fire. He became a Niffin.
That's what Fogg was talking about that night in the infirmary, about losing control.
Apparently, the others knew what the word meant, Niffin. They stared at Janet like they'd been turned to stone.
Well, Emily freaked out. I mean freaked out. Barricaded the door, wouldn't let anybody in until her beloved professor himself showed up. By that point, the whole school was awake. I can only imagine how he felt, since in a way the whole thing was his fault. He can't have been too proud of himself. I suppose he would have had to try to banish the Niffin if it didn't want to leave. I don't think those things really have an upper limit. Anyway, he kept his head, kept everybody else out of the room. He put her face back right there on the spot, which cannot have been easy. Whatever else he was, he must have been some magician, because that spell that came through the fountain, that was a nasty piece of work. And she probably twisted it up even more in the casting too. But he parsed it on the fly and made her reasonably presentable, though I hear she's never been quite the way she was. Not like she's deformed or anything, just different. Probably if you hadn't met her, you would never know. And that's pretty much it. I can't even imagine what they told the boy's parents. I hear he was from a magical family, so they probably got some version of the truth. But, the clean version.
There was a long silence. A bell was clanging far away. A boat on the river. The shadow from the trees had flooded all the way over them. Deliciously cool in the late summer afternoon.
What happened to the professor?
You haven't figured it out? They gave him a choice: resign in disgrace or transfer to Antarctica. Brakebills south. Guess which one he took?
Oh my God, it was Mayakovsky.
That explains a hell of a lot.
Doesn't it, though? Doesn't it just...
So what happened to Emily Greenstreet? She just left school? What happened to her? Did they send her to a normal school?
There was a trace of ground steel in her voice. Quentin wasn't totally sure where it was coming from.
I hear she does something businessy in Manhattan. They set her up with an easy corporate job, I don't know, management consulting or something. We own part of some big firm. Lots of magic to cover up the fact that she doesn't do anything. She just sits in an office and surfs the web all day. I think part of her just didn't survive what happened,
After that, even Janet stopped talking. Quentin let himself drift among the clouds. He felt spinny from the wine, like the earth had come untightened and was wobbling loose on its gimbaled base. Apparently, he wasn't the only one, because when Josh stood up after a few minutes, he immediately lost his balance and fell over again on the turf. There was scattered applause. But then he stood up again, steadied himself, did a slow, deep knee bend, and executed a perfect standing backflip. He stuck the landing and straightened up, beaming.
It worked. I can't believe it. I take back everything bad I ever said about Viking shamans. It fucking worked.
The spell had worked, though for some reason Josh was the only one who got anything out of it. As they picked up the picnic things and shook the sand out of the blanket, Josh did laps around the field, whooping and making huge superhero leaps in the fading light.
I am a Viking warrior. Cower before my might. Cower! The strength of Thor and all his mighty hosts flows through me, and I fucked your mother. I fucked your...
He's so happy. It's like he cooked something and it came out looking like the picture in the cookbook.
Eventually, Josh disappeared in search of other people to show off to, loudly singing the battle hymn of the Republic. Janet and Elliot straggled off in the direction of the cottage, Alice and Quentin toward the house. Sunburnt and sleepy and still half drunk, Quentin had already made up his mind to nap through dinner.
Worried he's going to hurt somebody. Probably himself.
There's some damage resistance built in, strengthening the skin and the skeleton. He could put his fist through a wall and probably not break anything.
Probably. If he can, he will.
Alice was even more quiet than usual. It wasn't until they were deep in the twilight alleys of the maze that Quentin saw that her face was slick with tears. His heart went cold.
All worried, Alice. Alice, sweetheart. What is it?
She pressed her face miserably into his shoulder.
Why did she have to tell that story? Why? Why is she like that?
Thoughtful, I immediately felt guilty for having enjoyed it. It was a horrible story. But there was something irresistibly gothic about it, too. She's just a gossip. She doesn't mean anything.
Doesn't she? Doesn't she? I always thought my brother died in a car crash.
Your brother? I don't understand.
He was 8 years older than me. My parents told me he died in a car crash. But that was him. I'm sure it was.
I don't understand. You think he was that boy in the story?
She nodded. I think he was. I know he was. Her eyes were red and rubbed with rage and hurt.
Worried? Jesus. Look, it's just a story. There's no way she could know.
She knows. It all works out, the timing of it. And he was like that. Charlie, he was always falling in love with people. He would have tried to save her himself. He would have done that. He was stupid that way.
Maybe she didn't know. Maybe Janet didn't realize it was him.
That's what she wants everybody to think. So you won't realize what a howling cunt she is.
Thoughtful howling was a big word at Brakebills that year. I was about to keep defending Janet when something else clicked. That's why you weren't invited here. It has to be, because of what happened to your brother.
She nodded, her eyes unfocused now, her relentless brain chewing away at this wrinkle, fitting other things into the bleak new picture it created.
They didn't want anything to happen to me. As if it would. God, why is everybody else in the world but us so fucking stupid?
They stopped a few yards short of the edge of the maze, in the deep shadow that pooled where the hedges grew close together, as if they couldn't face the daylight again, not quite yet.
At least now I know. But why did she tell that story, Hugh? She knew it would hurt me. Why would she do that?
Worried the idea of conflict within their little clique made him uncomfortable. He wanted to explain it away. He wanted everything to be perfect.
Alice snorted.
She's bitter because we're happy, and she's in love with Elliot. Always has been. And he doesn't love her.
She started walking again.
What? Wait. Why would she want Elliot?
Because she can't have him, and she has to have everything. I'm surprised she hasn't come after you. What, you think she hasn't slept with Josh?
They left the maze and climbed the stairs to the rear terrace, lit by the yellow light coming through the French doors and littered with premature autumn leaves. Alice cleaned herself up as best she could with the heels of her hands. She didn't wear much makeup anyway. Quentin stood by and silently handed her tissues to blow her nose with, adrift in his own thoughts.
Thoughtful it never failed to astonish me then, or ever, how much of the world around me was mysterious and hidden from view.
Fifth tier. Then September came, and it was just Quentin and Alice. The others were gone, in a swirl of falling leaves and a crackle of early frost.
Thoughtful it was a shock to see them go, but along with the shock, mixed in with it like the liquor in a cocktail, was an even greater feeling of relief. I wanted things to be good between them, to be better than good, to be perfect. But perfection is a nervy business, because the moment you spot the tiniest flaw, it's ruined. Perfection was part of my mythology of Brakebills, the story I told myself about my life there. A narrative as carefully constructed and reverently maintained as Fillory and Further, and I wanted to be able not just to tell it to myself, but to believe it. Worry that had been getting progressively more difficult. Pressure was building up in some subterranean holding tank, and right at the end there things had begun to come apart. Even I, with my almost limitless capacity for ignoring the obvious, had begun to pick up on it. Maybe Alice was right, maybe Janet really did hate her and love Elliot. Maybe it was something else, something so glaringly obvious that I couldn't stand to look at it directly. One way or another, the bonds that held them together were starting to fray. They were losing their magical ability to effortlessly love one another. Now, even though things would never be the same, at least I could always remember it the way I wanted to. The memories were safe, sealed forever in amber. As soon as the semester began, I did something I had already put off for much too long. I went to Dean Fogg and told him what had happened to Julia. Fogg just frowned and told him he'd take care of it. I wanted to climb across the desk and grab Fogg by his natty lapels for what he'd done to her by screwing up the memory spells. I tried to explain to Fogg that he had made Julia suffer in a way that nobody should ever have to suffer. Fogg just watched, neither moved nor unmoved. In the end, the best I could do was to make him promise that he would strain whatever the applicable regulations were to the breaking point to make things easier for her. It was all I could think of. I left Fogg's office feeling exactly as bad as I had when I entered it. Thoughtful sitting at dinner or strolling between classes through the dusty hallways full of sideways afternoon light, I began to realize for the first time how cut off from the rest of the school Alice and I had been for the past 2 years and how few of the other students I really knew. All the groups were cliques unto themselves, but the physical kids had been especially tight, and now we were all that was left of them. I still had classes with the other fifth years, and I chatted with them in a friendly way, but I knew that their loyalties and their attention were elsewhere.
Well, I bet they think we're horrible snobs. The way we keep to ourselves.
They were sitting on the cool stone rim of the fountain known as Sammy, a knockoff of the Laocoon in Rome, serpents strangling the renegade priest and his sons, but with water squirting cheerfully out of everybody's mouths. They'd come out to try a piece of messy domestic magic for removing stains from a skirt of Alice's that was best performed outdoors, but they'd forgotten a key ingredient, turmeric, and weren't ready to face the walk back yet. It was a beautiful fall Saturday morning. Or really, it was closer to noon. The temperature balanced precariously on the tipping point between warm and chilly.
You think so?